I stood behind that marble pillar exactly where my sister told me to, hidden from every camera, every guest, every moment that mattered. For 33 years, I'd made myself smaller so she could shine brighter. But this time, I wasn't alone. The man beside me was the one person she'd spent 8 years trying to erase from my life. The one who knew every lie she'd told, every life she'd destroyed, every dollar she'd stolen. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the room fell silent. Then he stepped forward. My sister's perfect smile cracked. Her groom went pale. And in the chaos that followed, 3 devastating truths came crashing down: a forged inheritance, a fake pregnancy, and a folder labelled Project K that documented years of calculated destruction. They made me invisible. So I became the storm they never saw coming. What happened next didn't just end a wedding, it exposed a family's darkest secrets and 25 years of lies. And before that day was over, everyone in that room would learn what happens when the invisible finally refuses to disappear. This is that story. My name is Kelly Hughes. I'm 35 years old, a financial analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm in Portland, and by most measures, I've built a good life for myself. I have my own apartment with a view of the river, a career I'm proud of, and enough stability to sleep well at night. But none of that mattered to my family. To them, I'd always been the daughter who required no attention, the sister who existed in the margins. The person you could forget was in the room. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday, slipped between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer. I almost missed it entirely. The envelope was thick, expensive, embossed with gold lettering that screamed luxury. Emily Harrison requests the honour of your presence. My sister's name she'd kept, our maiden name Harrison, despite the upcoming marriage, because she said it sounded more elegant than Hughes. The invitation itself was beautiful in that impersonal way that expensive things often are. Ivory cardstock calligraphy that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, a venue I recognised as one of the most exclusive estates in the area. But it was the note tucked inside that told me everything I needed to know. Not a personal letter, not even a phone call beforehand. Just a small card in Emily's handwriting. Hope you can make it would mean a lot. E. 6 words. That was all 33 years of being sisters earned me. I held that card for a long time, feeling the weight of everything it didn't say. I thought about our childhood, about the pattern that had shaped both our lives in such different ways. I remembered being 7 years old, bringing home straight A's on my report card. I'd run into the kitchen where Mum was helping Emily with her art project, a lopsided clay bowl that would later sit on the mantel for years. I'd waved my report card breathless with pride. Mum had glanced at it, smiled vaguely, and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," before turning back to Emily. "Now, honey, let's add more blue here. Yes, perfect. You're so talented." I'd walked back to my room, carefully placed the report card in my desk drawer, and never mentioned it again. That became the pattern. Emily's school play was a family event. My debate team nationals was something I attended alone. Emily's college graduation had a party with 50 guests. Mine had a card in the mail 2 weeks late. When Emily needed money for her failed boutique business, Dad wrote a check without hesitation. When I'd asked for help with my student loans, he'd said, "You're good with money, Kelly. You'll figure it out." And I had. I always did. Now I lived 3 hours away, which felt like the right distance. Close enough that I couldn't be accused of abandonment, far enough that I didn't have to watch the daily reminders that I'd never quite mattered enough. I had my career, my small circle of friends, my quiet routines. The family rarely called. When they did, it was usually because they needed something, a favour, information, someone to fill a seat at a holiday table when Emily's plans fell through. I looked at that wedding invitation again, at Emily's careless scrawl, and felt something familiar settle in my chest. That old worn feeling of being an afterthought. Expected to show up, expected to smile, expected to fade into the background while Emily shone. I'd become so good at making myself small, that sometimes I wondered if I'd disappear entirely. I was about to set the invitation aside when I noticed the edge of something else tucked in the envelope. Another card, this one folded and deliberately hidden beneath the formal invitation. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it out, but everything changed when I noticed a second, handwritten card tucked inside the invitation. The second card was smaller, written on plain stationery, rather than the formal wedding cardstock. Emily's handwriting was rushed, almost careless. I unfolded it and read the words once, then twice, certain I must have misunderstood. Kelly. About the ceremony. The photographer is really particular about sight lines and symmetry. Would you mind standing behind the pillar on the left side during the vows? That way you won't accidentally end up in frame. You know how you always look awkward in photos anyway. Thanks for understanding, it will make everything look cleaner. XOM. I stood there in my kitchen, the card trembling in my hand, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not surprise, exactly. That would have required expecting better. This was something closer to recognition. The final, undeniable proof of something I'd always known, but never wanted to name. She wanted me there, but she wanted me invisible. I read it again, searching for some hint of self-awareness, some indication that Emily understood what she was asking. But the tone was breezy, almost cheerful, as if she'd asked me to bring a salad to a potluck. The XO at the end felt like a particular cruelty and affectation of affection wrapped around a request for my erasure. Stand behind a pillar. Stay out of the photos. Don't let anyone see you exist. My hands moved before my brain fully caught up. I was calling my parents' house, my mother's number programmed into my phone under home, even though I hadn't lived there in over a decade. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright with that particular tone she reserved for phone calls, the everything is wonderful voice. Kelly. What a nice surprise. We weren't expecting to hear from you. So, Mum, I got Emily's invitation. I tried to keep my voice steady, professional, the way I spoke in meetings when I needed to present uncomfortable data. There was a note inside. Did you know she's asking me to stand behind a pillar during the ceremony, so I won't be in the photos? There was a pause. I heard her exhale, heard the shift in her tone, from bright to careful. Oh, that. Emily mentioned something about the photographer having specific requirements. Specific requirements that I be hidden? Kelly, honey, it's not like that. You're reading too much into it. Emily's under a lot of stress with the planning. You know how particular she is about aesthetics. The venue is very elegant, and the photographer is apparently quite renowned. There are logistics involved that we don't understand. Did she ask anyone else to stand behind a pillar, or just me? Another pause, longer this time. I think, let me get your father. John. Her voice moved away from the phone. John, can you come here? Kelly has a question about the wedding. I heard shuffling, muffled conversation, then my father's voice already carrying that edge of impatience that appeared whenever I required more than a few minutes of attention. Kelly, what's the problem? Dad, Emily's asking me to hide during her wedding ceremony, behind a pillar, so I won't be in any photographs. That's not a logistics issue. That's humiliation. He sighed, the kind of long-suffering exhale that suggested I was being difficult, making mountains out of molehills, failing to understand what really mattered. Kelly, it's your sister's wedding day. One day, one afternoon. Is it really so much to ask that you just do what makes her comfortable? This day is about her. Can't you put aside your feelings for a few hours? Something hot and sharp twisted in my stomach. My feelings, Dad, she's asking me to literally hide. To not exist in any record of this event. How is that putting aside feelings? How is that not deliberately erasing me? You're being dramatic. His voice had cooled, gone from impatient to dismissive. Emily's not erasing you. You're invited, aren't you? You're part of the celebration. She just has a vision for how she wants things to look. The girl's been planning this for a year. Can you really not give her this one thing. I've given her everything. The words came out before I could stop them, raw and too honest. My whole life, I've given her everything. Every moment, every achievement, That's enough. Dad's voice went hard now, the tone that ended discussions. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this attitude isn't helpful. Your sister is getting married. You'll stand where she asks you to stand. You'll smile and you'll be grateful you were included at all. Plenty of families don't even invite extended family to ceremonies. Emily wanted you there. That should mean something. Behind a pillar. Kelly! That was my mother's voice again, softer, but no less firm. She'd taken the phone back, or maybe she'd been on the extension all along. Sweetheart, you understand, don't you? It's just one day. Emily needs everything to be perfect. You know how she gets when things don't go exactly as planned. It's easier for everyone if we just accommodate her. You've always been so good at being flexible. There it was, the word that had defined my entire existence in this family, flexible, which really meant bendable, forgettable, erasable. I'd been flexible when Emily took my bedroom because hers was too small. Flexible when my college graduation party was cancelled because Emily had a presentation the same week. Flexible when every holiday became about Emily's schedule, Emily's preferences, Emily's comfort. I'd spent 33 years being flexible, being small, being invisible when it suited them, and present when they needed something. I have to go, I said, my voice hollow even to my own ears. So you'll do it? Mum asked, hope creeping into her tone. You'll stand where Emily asked. I'll let her know you're fine with it. She'll be so relieved. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I ended the call and stood in my kitchen. The invitation still spread across the counter. Emily's handwritten instructions mocking me with every casual word. Something inside me was shifting, cracking, rearranging itself into a shape I didn't recognize. For the first time in my life, I felt something beyond hurt, beyond resignation. I felt the beginning of something that might have been anger, or maybe finally it was self-preservation. I was staring at those words stand behind the pillar when my phone lit up on the counter. A name I hadn't seen in 8 years glowed on the screen. Mark Reynolds. My finger hovered over the screen, frozen between answering and letting it go to voicemail. Mark Reynolds. The name alone opened a door in my memory I'd spent years keeping sealed. We'd dated for almost 2 years, and I'd thought foolishly maybe that he might be the person who finally saw me. Really saw me. Not as the forgettable sister, the accommodating daughter, the person who took up as little space as possible. With Mark, I'd felt substantial, real. And then, one day he was gone. No explanation, no fight, no gradual fade, just a text message saying he needed space, followed by complete silence. I'd called, texted, even drove to his apartment once, humiliating myself by knocking on a door I knew he was behind, listening to the silence on the other side. Eventually, I'd stopped trying. I'd added him to the list of things I'd apparently failed at, relationships I wasn't worth fighting for. The phone was still ringing. My thumb moved before I could overthink it. Hello. Kelly. His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, slightly rough, with that particular cadence that used to make my name sound like something worth saying. God, I didn't know if you'd pick up. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd blocked this number years ago. I sank into one of my kitchen chairs, Emily's note still clutched in my other hand. Mark, why are you calling? Because I owe you an apology. A massive, unforgivable, 8 years overdue apology. He took a breath, and I heard something in it that sounded like shame. I left you with no explanation. I cut you off completely, and I need you to know that I've regretted it every single day since. That's great, Mark. Really, but it's been 8 years. I've moved on. The lie tasted bitter, but I'd gotten good at bitter truths over the years. I know, and I don't expect I'm not calling to try to get back together or anything like that. I'm calling because I found out the truth. About why I left. About what I was told. He paused, And when he spoke again, his voice was tight with anger. Kelly, someone lied to me, deliberately, systematically, convincingly. And I believed them because I was young and stupid and I trusted the wrong person. Something cold settled in my chest. What are you talking about? Your sister. The words dropped like stones. Emily. She came to me about a month before I disappeared. Said she was worried about you, that she needed to talk to me privately because she cared about your well-being. She seemed so concerned, so genuine. She told me things about you that... He stopped, exhaled hard. She said you were using me, that you told her I was just a placeholder until someone better came along, someone with more money. She said you'd laughed about my family's financial situation, called my parents towny trash, behind my back. I felt the room tilt slightly. Mark, I never said anything like that. You know I didn't. You met my parents. You saw how my family was. Why would I judge yours? I know that now. Back then, I was 27, working 2 jobs to pay off student loans and already insecure about not being able to give you the kind of life I thought you deserved. When Emily showed me text screenshots, which I now know were fabricated, I believed her. She was your sister, your family. Why would she lie? What did the texts say? Horrible things. Things about me being a temporary distraction, about you telling your friends I was fine for now, but not husband material. She even had one where you allegedly called me a charity case. His voice cracked slightly. I was devastated. I felt humiliated. And instead of confronting you, instead of asking if any of it was true, I just ran. I told myself I was protecting my dignity. Actually, I was being a coward. I pressed my palm against my forehead, trying to process what he was telling me. Emily had done this, had deliberately destroyed the one relationship where I'd felt seen, valued, important. And she'd done it with such calculation that Mark had believed her completely. Why are you telling me this now? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Because I moved back to Portland 6 months ago. I've done well for myself software development, started my own company. I'm not that broke kid anymore. And one of the first things I saw when I got back was your sister's engagement announcement in the society pages. Big photo, big smile, talking about her fairy tale wedding. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so bitter. I saw her face and everything came flooding back. So I started digging. I'm good with data, Kelly. It's what I do. I found my old phone recovered those text conversations Emily showed me, ran them through metadata analysis. They were fabricated, created on her device screenshots, edited to look like they came from your number. I found emails between Emily and mutual acquaintances, where she was systematically spreading rumours about you. I found evidence of her interfering in your job applications, your friendships, even your relationship with your parents. My hand was shaking now, Emily's wedding note trembling with it. She's been doing this for years. Years. I've spent the last 3 months building a timeline, collecting evidence, trying to understand the scope of it. Kelly, she didn't just destroy our relationship. She's been destroying your entire life. Methodically, deliberately. And she's been getting away with it because she's careful and because... He stopped himself. Because no one would believe me over her, I finished quietly. Because she's the golden child and I'm the one everyone forgets about. I believed her over you, Mark said, his voice heavy with regret. That's on me. I should have trusted you, should have asked you directly. Instead, I let her manipulate me into breaking your heart, and I've had to live with that. He paused and I heard papers rustling. I know this is a lot. I know I have no right to walk back into your life after 8 years. But when I saw that wedding announcement, when I realised she was about to have this huge celebration while you... He stopped. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Truth matters more than past pain. and you deserve to know what she did. I looked down at the note in my hand. Stand behind the pillar. The pattern was so clear now, so obvious. Emily had spent our entire lives making sure I stayed in the shadows, and when natural circumstances weren't enough, she'd actively pushed me there. "Mark," I said slowly, "did you say you saw her engagement announcement?" "Yeah, in the Portland Business Journal. Big feature about merging families, couples, all that stuff. Why? Did you see who she's marrying?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mark spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper, and I heard something in it that might have been shock or maybe recognition. "Kelly, you won't believe who your sister is marrying." The silence on my end of the phone stretched so long that Mark finally said my name again, uncertain. "Kelly, are you still there?" "Tell me." My voice didn't sound like my own. "Who is she marrying? Ethan Mitchell? Does that name mean anything to you?" The room seemed to contract around me. Ethan Mitchell. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade, but the memory arrived fully formed, sharp-edged, and achingly clear. Graduate program orientation at the university, both of us arriving early because we were the types who showed up 15 minutes before anything started. We'd gravitated toward each other in that way people do, when they recognise something familiar in a stranger. A shared awkwardness maybe, or just the relief of having someone to talk to before the crowd arrived. "I know that name," I said quietly. "I thought you might. I did some research after I saw the announcement, pulled his LinkedIn profile, his educational background. He was in the graduate business program at State the same time you were. And Kelly, I found something interesting. The university's archive of their graduate newsletter from that year. There's a photo from orientation week. You and Ethan Mitchell standing together, both holding coffee cups, both smiling. The caption says, 'New students discover common interests.'" I closed my eyes and I was back there 23 years old, nervous about starting graduate school, afraid I'd be out of my depth. Ethan had been kind, genuinely interested when I talked about my undergraduate thesis on economic modelling. We discovered we were both early risers, both preferred studying in the library's third floor, where it was quietest, both had a borderline obsessive appreciation for well-organised spreadsheets. It was easy talking to him, natural. He'd mentioned getting coffee sometime, exchanging numbers so we could coordinate study sessions. We talked a few times. I told Mark my throat tight. During the first couple weeks of the programme. He was nice, smart. We had similar approaches to problem solving. I thought maybe... I stopped myself embarrassed even now. I thought he might ask me out. He seemed interested. "He was interested," Mark said, and something in his tone made me brace myself. "Kelly, I've spent 3 months piecing together what your sister did to you. Ethan's not just some random groom. This is part of the pattern. Tell me what happened after those first few weeks." I pulled up the memory details I'd buried because they'd hurt too much to examine. Emily transferred to State that semester. She'd been at community college, said she wanted to upgrade her education. I was surprised because she'd never mentioned being interested in that school before. She asked if she could come to some of my study groups, meet my new friends. I thought it was nice that she wanted to be part of my life for once. "And Ethan was in those study groups?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, Emily showed up the third week, brought homemade cookies, made everyone laugh. She was so charming, so effortlessly social in a way I've never been, and she focused a lot of attention on Ethan, asked him questions about his background, his family, where he'd done undergrad. He mentioned he'd been on scholarship, that his parents were public school teachers, that he'd worked full-time while getting his degree. And then what happened? Ethan stopped talking to me, just completely withdrew. Wouldn't meet my eyes in class, stopped responding to my texts about study sessions. I ran into him once in the library and tried to ask if I'd done something wrong. He looked at me like I'd hurt him, somehow said something about how he knew where he stood with people like me and walked away. I never understood what I'd done. Mark's exhale was long and heavy. "You didn't do anything, Kelly. Your sister did." I found her old social media account's messages. she thought she'd deleted, but that live forever in cached versions of pages. She told Ethan that you'd talked about him behind his back, said you'd laughed about his scholarship background, called him a charity case trying to run with the trust fund kids. She showed him screenshots of texts allegedly from you to your friends making fun of his wardrobe, his off-brand laptop, the fact that he brought packed lunches instead of buying food on campus. I felt sick. I never said any of those things. I never even thought them. My family wasn't wealthy either. I had student loans, I worked part-time. Why would I judge someone for the same situation I was in? Emily made it convincing. She had mutual friends, her sorority sisters mostly, who backed up her stories, told Ethan they'd heard you talking, confirmed you'd said those things. By the time she was done, Ethan was convinced you were a snob who'd been playing nice while secretly looking down on him. And Emily was right there to comfort him. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. She was the sympathetic ear, the kind sister who felt terrible about exposing the truth, but thought he deserved to know. Exactly. Within a month, they were dating. Within 2 months, it was serious. And then Emily transferred again to a different school, said state wasn't the right fit. But she kept dating Ethan long distance, stayed in his life while making sure you were completely out of it. I stood up needing to move, needing to do something with the energy coursing through me. She took him. She saw that I liked him, that we had a connection, and she just took him. Kelly, there's more. Mark's voice carried a weight that made me stop pacing. I need to tell you the rest, about why I really left. It's connected to all of this. What do you mean connected? After Emily destroyed your relationship with Ethan, she apparently decided to make sure no one else got close to you either. When you and I started dating 5 years later, she must have seen it as another threat, another person who might make you happy, might make you feel seen. She couldn't have that. So she came to you with those fake texts. She came to me with more than that, Kelly. She came with leverage. Mark's voice went quiet, ashamed. When I was 19, I made a terrible mistake. I drove drunk, got pulled over, spent a night in jail, lost my license for 6 months. It was the worst thing I'd ever done, and I spent years making sure it never happened again. I got sober, rebuilt my life, earned back my own trust. But it was on my record. Emily found out. And she told me that if I didn't break up with you immediately and disappear completely, she'd send my DUI record to my employer. I was working at a financial firm at the time, and that kind of criminal record would have gotten me fired. She also threatened to tell your parents, said they were very conservative, very concerned about their daughters' reputations, and that they'd make sure you never spoke to me again anyway. His voice cracked. She gave me 48 hours to end things and get out of your life. Said if I told you why she'd follow through on all of it. I was terrified and ashamed, and I took the coward's way out. I just ran. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. 2 relationships. 2 men who'd cared about me, who'd seen something in me worth knowing. And Emily had systematically eliminated both of them, using lies and manipulation and calculated cruelty. Mark, I'm so sorry she did that to you. You shouldn't have had to. No, his voice was firm. I'm not looking for absolution. I made my choices. I should have been braver, should have trusted you enough to tell you the truth and let us figure it out together. Instead, I protected myself and abandoned you. That's on me. He paused. But Kelly, I need you to understand the scope of what she's been doing. This isn't just sibling rivalry or competition. This is deliberate, sustained sabotage of your entire life. Ethan, me, probably others we don't even know about. Jobs you applied for where she knew someone on the hiring committee. Friendships that mysteriously cooled. Every time you started to build something, to be seen, to matter to someone, she found a way to tear it down. I looked at Emily's note again, the casual cruelty of it. Stand behind the pillar. Don't be in the photos. Stay invisible. It had never been about aesthetics or photography logistics. It had always been about keeping me exactly where Emily needed me, hidden, diminished, erased. Mark's voice came through the phone, trembling with an emotion I couldn't quite name. She didn't just steal him from you, Kelly. She's been stealing your entire life. Mark and I talked for another 20 minutes after that, though I barely remember the specifics. He offered to send me the evidence he'd compiled, asked if I needed anything, told me he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. I heard myself responding with words that sounded calm and measured, but inside I was fracturing into pieces I wasn't sure I could put back together. When we finally hung up, I sat in my kitchen as the afternoon light shifted across the walls, trying to process the architecture of my own erasure. Everything I'd believed about myself, that I was forgettable, that I somehow failed to connect with people, that relationships fell apart because I wasn't quite enough. All of it had been carefully constructed by the one person who was supposed to be on my side. My sister hadn't just been the favourite child. She'd been actively working to ensure I stayed invisible, unwanted, alone. I don't know how long I sat there before my phone rang again. I almost didn't answer, exhausted from the emotional carnage of the last hour, but the number had a professional look to it. Local area code formatted like a business line. "This is Kelly Hughes?" I said, my voice hoarse. "Ms. Hughes, thank goodness I've reached you." The woman on the other end sounded both relieved and slightly exasperated. "This is Margaret Chen from Whitmore and Associates. We're the attorneys handling your grandmother's estate. I've been trying to contact you for several months now. The letters we sent to your address on file were all returned as undeliverable." My grandmother had died 10 years ago. I'd gone to the funeral, sat in the back row while Emily sobbed dramatically in the front, received a few small personal items in the will reading. A photo album, some costume jewellery, a set of teacups I'd admired as a child. Nothing that required months of legal follow-up. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion," I said. "My grandmother's estate was settled years ago." "The primary estate, yes, but there was a separate private trust, Ms. Hughes. Your grandmother established it specifically for you with the very particular instructions. The trust matured when you turned 30, which was 5 years ago. We've been attempting to fulfill the distribution requirements, but we've had considerable difficulty locating you." I felt something shift in my chest. "What do you mean, a private trust?" "Your grandmother created a trust fund of $500,000 designated solely for you, Kelly Elizabeth Hughes. The terms specified that the funds would become available when you reached age 30, and that distribution required your personal authorization and signature. The documents were structured to ensure complete privacy, not disclosed at the general will reading handled by a separate legal team known only to the trustees and the beneficiary." $500,000. The number was so large it felt abstract, impossible. My grandmother, who'd lived modestly in a small house filled with thrift store furniture and hand-me-down dishes, had left me $500,000. "Ms. Chen, I never received any notification about this. I turned 30 5 years ago. If the trust matured, then why am I only hearing about it now?" There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers shuffling. "According to our records, all correspondence was sent to the address listed as your emergency contact at the time the trust was established. That would be your parents' home address, 214 Maple Avenue. We sent multiple certified letters beginning shortly before your 30th birthday, outlining the trust terms and requesting you come in to sign the distribution paperwork. My parents' address, the house I'd moved out of at 18 and rarely visited. They'd never mentioned any letters from attorneys, never said a word about a trust fund. But they would have seen those letters, would have known. Ms. Chen, I never received those letters. I never signed any paperwork. I didn't know this trust existed until 30 seconds ago." Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from exasperated to concerned. "Ms. Hughes, I need to inform you of something troubling. While we weren't able to reach you directly, we did eventually receive signed authorization for the distribution. The paperwork came through your parents, who were listed as co-trustees. They presented a notarized document bearing your signature authorizing an emergency withdrawal of the full trust amount 3 years ago. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. That's impossible. I never signed anything. I never even knew about the trust. The signature was accompanied by a letter explaining that you were experiencing a medical emergency and needed immediate access to the funds. Your parents as trustees verified the signature and approved the transfer. The money was distributed according to the authorization we received. Where did the money go? To the account specified in the authorization documents. An account in the name of Emily Harrison, your sister. Ms. Chen's voice had gone very quiet. Ms. Hughes, are you telling me you didn't authorize this transfer? My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Emily. Of course it was Emily. $500,000 that my grandmother had left specifically for me that was supposed to be mine at 30 gone. Taken. Stolen. I never signed anything. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know about the trust. I didn't authorize any transfer, and I certainly didn't give my sister permission to take money my grandmother left to me. Then we have a serious problem. Miss Chen's professional composure had cracked, and I could hear the alarm in her voice. Ms. Hughes, if what you're saying is accurate, we're looking at forgery fraud and a severe breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents as trustees had a legal obligation to verify your authorization directly. If they approved a forged signature without proper verification, they violated their fiduciary responsibility. And if your sister knowingly presented forged documents to access funds that weren't hers, that's criminal fraud. I thought about my parents' easy dismissal when I'd called about Emily's wedding note. Just do what makes Emily comfortable. Their lifetime of choosing Emily's momentary desires over my basic dignity. And now, this facilitating the theft of my inheritance money my grandmother had specifically protected for me set aside to ensure I'd have something they couldn't take away. Except they had taken it, or let Emily take it. Same difference. What can be done about this? I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. You'll need to come into our office immediately. We'll need to verify your signature against the authorization documents we received. If there's a discrepancy, and based on this conversation, I believe we'll need to involve law enforcement. This isn't a civil matter, Ms. Hughes. This is theft, potentially criminal fraud. We're talking about $500,000 obtained under false pretenses. She paused. I'm so sorry. Oh, your grandmother took great care to protect this gift for you. She left very specific instructions about ensuring you received it personally, that no one could interfere. She must have known something about your family dynamics that made her want to shelter these funds. My grandmother had known, had seen what my parents couldn't or wouldn't see, had tried to give me something that would be mine alone, something Emily couldn't touch, and Emily had found a way to take it anyway. Miss Chen, when can I come in? Tomorrow morning, first thing. I'll have all the documentation ready for review. And, Ms. Hughes, there's something else. Her voice softened slightly. Your grandmother left a sealed letter to be opened only by you. She left it with instructions that it should be given to you when you came to claim your inheritance. It's been sitting in our vault for 10 years waiting. The attorney's next words made my breath catch. There's something else. Your grandmother left a sealed letter to be opened only by you. I arrived at the law offices of Whitmore and Associates at 8 the next morning, having barely slept. Margaret Chen met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who'd spent decades navigating family estate disputes. She shook my hand firmly and led me to a conference room where stacks of documents waited on a polished oak table. Before we review the paperwork, she said, reaching into a leather portfolio, I want to give you this. Your grandmother was very specific that you should read her letter before anything else. She said you'd need to hear from her first. The envelope was thick cream paper, my name written across it in my grandmother's distinctive sloping handwriting. The seal was still intact, undisturbed for a decade. I held it, carefully aware that I was holding the last words my grandmother had meant specifically for me. "Take your time," Ms. Chen said gently. "I'll be just outside when you're ready." After she left, I sat alone in that quiet room and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 pages, handwritten on my grandmother's personal stationery, the paper slightly yellowed with age. I recognized the date at the top, written 6 months before she died, when she must have known her time was limited. "My dearest Kelly," it began, and I had to stop immediately because tears blurred my vision. I wiped my eyes and continued. "If you're reading this, you finally learned about the money. I'm glad. I worried they might keep it from you, somehow find a way to make you doubt even this. I left it for you because I saw what your parents couldn't or wouldn't. You were always made smaller to make Emily larger. I watched it happen from the time you were small children, and my heart broke a little more each year as you learned to expect less. Less need, less be less." The words were almost unbearable in their clarity, their acknowledgement of what I'd always felt, but never been able to name without being told I was imagining things, being sensitive, making trouble. "Your parents loved you, Kelly. I believe that. But they feared Emily's tantrums more than they valued your peace. Emily learned early that tears and rage gave her power, and your parents never learned that giving in to those tantrums was teaching her to be a tyrant and teaching you to be invisible. I watched you shrink year after year, watched you learn to celebrate, quietly hurt, silently need nothing. I watched you become a ghost in your own family, and I couldn't bear it." I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to contain the sob building in my chest. She'd seen it, all of it. I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive or ungrateful. It had been real, and someone had witnessed it. "This money is not just inheritance, sweetheart. It's permission. Permission to stop disappearing. Permission to take up space. Permission to matter without apologizing for it. I've watched you spend your whole life making yourself small enough that maybe finally they'd notice you. But people who need you, invisible, will never celebrate your presence. They'll just expect you to shrink more." The letter continued my grandmother's words, steady and clear, even a decade after her death. "I've structured this trust so your parents can't control it, can't redirect it, can't give it to Emily instead. It's yours alone. But I know them, Kelly. I know they'll try to find a way. I know Emily will need something, and your parents will pressure you to share, to be generous, to remember family comes first. Don't you dare. This is about survival. This is about finally having something they can't take from you." There was a paragraph about practical matters, about how she'd chosen a law firm 3 states away to handle the trust specifically so my parents couldn't influence the process. About how she'd instructed the lawyers to find me personally if my parents claimed to be managing it for me. She tried to protect this gift from every angle she could imagine. The final paragraph made me cry in earnest tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink slightly. "I won't be there to see the woman you become when you finally stop making yourself small. But I know her already. She's brave and strong and worthy of being seen. She always has been. The invisibility was never yours, Kelly, it was theirs. They couldn't see you because seeing you would mean acknowledging how they'd failed you. Don't let them make you invisible anymore. Don't let them convince you that the problem is you taking up space, instead of them failing to make space for you. Promise me, my darling girl. Promise me you'll finally let yourself exist." I sat in that conference room and let myself cry in a way I hadn't since I was a child. Deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me. My grandmother had seen me, had loved me enough to try to protect me even after death, had known that I'd need permission, actual explicit permission to believe I deserved to take up space in the world. When I finally composed myself enough to read the postscript, I found one last gift. "P.S. Your grandfather and I had a long, happy marriage because we learned early to say hard truths with love. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong with the trust. Don't let that stop you. The money was meant to help, but the real gift is this: you have been seen. Your pain was real. Your erasure was deliberate. And you are allowed to be angry about it. You're allowed to fight back. You're allowed to exist loudly and messily and imperfectly. You're allowed to stop being the easy daughter, the forgotten sister, the person who needs nothing. Fight for yourself, Kelly. I'll be cheering from wherever I am. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then sat for a long moment, letting my grandmother's words settle into the spaces inside me that had been empty my whole life. She'd given me more than money. She'd given me validation, confirmation that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful or inherently unlovable. She'd given me permission to stop shrinking. When Ms. Chen returned, I was calmer, clearer than I'd been in years. We reviewed the forged signatures, mine obviously fake, when compared to my actual signature clumsy enough that any reasonable trustee should have questioned it. We documented the timeline, the emergency claim that was never verified, the way my parents had simply accepted Emily's word without ever contacting me directly. By the time I left the office, 3 hours later, plans were in motion. Police reports filed, fraud investigators contacted, a civil attorney retained. But more than that, something had shifted in me. My grandmother's letter had done what 33 years of trying to earn my family's love had never accomplished. It had made me feel seen, real, worth protecting. I called Mark from my car, and when he answered, I didn't waste time with preamble. I need your help. I need to know everything Emily took from me. Every relationship she destroyed, every opportunity she sabotaged, every lie she told. I need proof of all of it. You're going to fight back. It wasn't a question. I'm going to the wedding, I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been. And I'm not standing behind any pillar, not this time, not ever again. Mark's friend arrived at my apartment 2 days later, a woman named Sandra Chen, who introduced herself as a forensic accountant specializing in fraud cases. She had sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every financial deception imaginable. Mark sat beside me on the couch as Sandra spread documents across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. I've traced the trust fund disbursement, she said without preamble. $500,000 transferred to an account in Emily Harrison's name 3 years ago, exactly as the attorney's records indicated. From there, the money moved quickly. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop columns of numbers that told the story of my inheritance's disappearance. $60,000 went to startup costs for a boutique clothing store. Business registration, inventory, store build-out. The business lasted 11 months before filing for bankruptcy. Total loss. I stared at the numbers, each one representing a piece of what my grandmother had tried to protect for me. What about the rest? Another $120,000 in what I'd categorize as lifestyle expenses. High-end furniture, luxury vacations, designer clothing, jewelry. There's a $50,000 wedding ring purchase from 8 months ago. Sandra glanced at me over her glasses. I'm assuming that's related to the upcoming wedding. Her engagement ring, I said flatly. She bought her own engagement ring with my inheritance. The remainder went to debt payments, credit cards, personal loans, and what appears to be money owed to private lenders. Some of those debts were already in collections. Sandra clicked through more spreadsheets. Based on current records, Emily Harrison has approximately $4,000 in accessible accounts. The $500,000 is gone. Spent, paid out, unrecoverable through direct seizure. If you win a judgment against her collection, would require wage garnishment or asset liquidation, and based on her current financial profile, that would take years. The casual cruelty of it was stunning. Emily had taken the money my grandmother left specifically for me and burned through it in 3 years. Vacations, I'd never take furniture for a home. I didn't own a business venture she'd apparently approached with the same careless entitlement she brought to everything else in her life. There's something else you should look into, Sandra said, turning her attention to me directly. When I run comprehensive financial investigations, I always check the subject's credit profile, but I'd also recommend you check your own. Identity theft is more common among family members than people realise, and given the pattern of financial fraud, we're already seeing it's worth verifying. I hadn't checked my credit in over a year, maybe longer. I'd been saving steadily, my finances simple and carefully managed. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. But Sandra's tone suggested she'd seen something that concerned her, and Mark's expression had gone grim. "I'll pull my credit report right now," I said, already reaching for my laptop. It took 15 minutes to navigate the credit bureau websites and request my reports. When the first one loaded, I stared at the screen trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My credit score, which had been over 750 the last time I checked, now sat at 450, deep in the red. Below the score were the reasons multiple accounts in their collection's high credit utilization missed payments spanning 2 years. "That's not right," I said, my voice distant even to my own ears. "I don't have any credit cards except my one Visa, and I pay that off every month." Sandra moved to sit beside me, her eyes scanning the report with professional focus. "According to this, you have 4 credit cards. 3 of them are maxed out with balances totaling approximately $80,000. None of them have received a payment in at least 6 months. They're all in collections." I clicked through to the detailed listings. 3 cards from institutions I'd never contacted, never applied to, never used. Accounts opened over a 2-year period starting 4 years ago. The billing addresses listed were all variations of my parents' home address, not my actual apartment. Someone had opened credit cards in my name, used my social security number and personal information, and systematically destroyed my credit while I remained completely unaware. "This is identity theft," Sandra said, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. "You need to file police reports immediately. Freeze your credit. Contest these accounts with the credit bureaus. This is a serious crime, Kelly." Mark leaned forward, pointing at the screen. "Look at the purchase histories on those cards. High-end retailers, luxury goods, the same boutique business Emily opened. This wasn't some random identity thief. This was someone who knew your information, had access to your documents, and was purchasing things that fit Emily's spending pattern. The evidence was damning and obvious. Emily hadn't just stolen my inheritance. She'd been using my identity to fund her lifestyle for years, racking up debt in my name that I'd known nothing about until this moment. Every purchase she couldn't quite afford on her own income, every luxury item she wanted but couldn't justify, charged to accounts that would destroy my credit and my financial future while leaving her own record pristine. "I need to call my attorney," I said, already pulling up Margaret Chen's number. "This is beyond the trust fund fraud. This is years of systematic theft." The call with Ms. Chen was brief and focused. She listened to Sandra's findings, asked several pointed questions about documentation and evidence, then delivered her assessment with professional directness. "This strengthens your case considerably. Identity theft is a federal crime. Combined with the trust fund forgery, we're looking at a pattern of criminal behaviour. I'll coordinate with the fraud investigators. But Kelly, you need to understand something." Her pause made my stomach tighten. "What?" "The trust fund documents your parents signed as witnesses. I've had them analysed by a handwriting expert. Both signatures are genuine. The documents were notarized with your parents present. The notary's records show your mother specifically confirmed she'd witnessed Kelly Hughes signing the authorization." Ms. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "This wasn't passive enabling. Your parents actively participated in the fraud. They went to a notary, presented forged documents as legitimate, and gave sworn testimony that they'd witnessed you sign. That's perjury at minimum, conspiracy to commit fraud at worst." I closed my eyes, my grandmother's letter still fresh in my mind. They feared Emily's tantrums more than they valued your peace. How far had that fear taken them? All the way to committing crimes, apparently. all the way to destroying their other daughter's financial future to protect Emily's comfort. Both parents signed. I asked, needing to hear it confirmed. Both. Your father as trustee, your mother as witness. The notary seal is dated documented official. There's no ambiguity here. They knew what they were doing. Mark's hand found mine, squeezing gently. Sandra had gone quiet, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal something that looked like sympathy. Ms. Chen continued speaking, outlining next steps, legal processes, timelines for filing charges. But one phrase cut through everything else sharp and unavoidable. We can file charges, but your parents will face them too. This is your family we're talking about. I sat in Dr. Winters' office 3 days later, the familiar space feeling different somehow. The same comfortable chairs, the same soft lighting, the same box of tissues on the side table that I'd reached for countless times over the past 2 years. But I was different. The person who'd walked into this office every other week talking about workplace stress and difficulty maintaining friendships felt like someone I used to be. Dr. Winters settled into her chair across from me, her expression calm and attentive in that way she had, that always made me feel heard. You sounded urgent on the phone when you asked to move up our appointment. What's happened? I'd prepared for this, organised my thoughts the way I approached presentations at work. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was raw and unfiltered. If I do what I need to do, what I should do, I'm going to destroy my family. And I don't know if I can live with that. Tell me what you've discovered, she said gently. So I did. The stolen inheritance, the forged signatures, my parents' active participation, Emily's identity theft, the credit cards that had demolished my financial standing. I laid it all out in a rush of words that felt both liberating and terrifying. Dr. Winters listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something that looked like controlled anger on my behalf. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward slightly. Kelly, I want you to do something for me. Describe what you mean when you say destroy your family. If I press charges, my parents could face criminal prosecution, prison, maybe. Their reputations would be ruined. Emily would be charged with federal crimes. The family would fall apart. Everyone would blame me for... Stop, Doctor, Winters said, her voice still gentle but firm. Now describe what happened to you. Describe the destruction that's already occurred. I faltered, not understanding where she was going. Your grandmother left you $500,000, she continued. Money she specifically protected for you, knowing your family would try to take it. That money is gone, stolen through forgery and fraud. Your credit has been destroyed by identity theft, which will impact your ability to buy a home, get loans, possibly even affect future job opportunities. You've spent 33 years being systematically diminished, erased, and manipulated. Multiple relationships were sabotaged by deliberate lies. You've been so trained to accept your own invisibility that you're sitting here worried about destroying the people who did this to you. She paused. Kelly described that destruction. Compare it to what you're afraid of causing. The tears came before I could stop them. It's not the same thing. They're my family. If I do this, I'm choosing to hurt them. Did they choose to hurt you? The question landed like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to defend them, to explain that they loved Emily more, but didn't mean to hurt me, that they were just weak, not malicious. But the words wouldn't come because they weren't true. My parents had stood in a notary's office and sworn they'd watched me sign documents I'd never seen. Emily had used my social security number to open fraudulent accounts. These weren't passive failures. These were active choices. Every time you stayed quiet when they hurt you, what were you teaching them? Dr. Winters asked, her voice impossibly gentle, for the brutal truth she was delivering. That it was okay, I whispered. That your pain doesn't matter, she corrected. Kelly, I want you to hear this clearly. Your silence wasn't peace. It was permission. Permission to take from you, to diminish you, to erase you. You thought you were being the bigger person keeping the family together. Actually, you were teaching them that they could hurt you without consequences. I pressed my hands over my face, my whole body shaking with sobs I'd been holding back for decades. Dr. Winters let me cry, waited until I'd exhausted myself enough to hear what she said next. Seeking accountability isn't cruelty, Kelly. It's survival. You can hold compassion for whatever pain shaped Emily into who she is. You can understand that your parents are flawed people who made terrible choices, and you can still demand that they face consequences. Both truths can exist simultaneously. Compassion doesn't mean letting them continue to harm you. But what if I'm just being vengeful? What if I'm doing this because I'm angry and I want them to hurt the way I've hurt? Are you? Dr. Winters asked. Or are you trying to stop a pattern that's been destroying you for 33 years? There's a difference between revenge and justice, Kelly. Revenge is about making them suffer. Justice is about stopping the harm and making restoration possible. Which one are you seeking? I thought about my grandmother's letter about her explicit permission to fight back, about Mark's years of evidence showing Emily's systematic sabotage, about the credit cards I'd never opened and the inheritance I'd never known existed until it was already gone. I just want it to stop, I said, my voice hoarse. I want them to acknowledge what they did. I want the money back so I can have what my grandmother meant for me to have. I want my credit fixed so Emily's choices don't keep punishing me for years. My voice broke. I want them to see me, finally, even if seeing me means seeing what they did to me. Then that's not revenge, Dr. Winters said firmly. That's healing. And Kelly, healing requires acknowledgement. Without acknowledgement, nothing changes. They'll keep taking because you'll keep allowing it, and the pattern will continue until you don't exist at all, except as a supporting character in Emily's life. She leaned forward. Your grandmother knew this. That's why she wrote what she wrote. She was giving you permission to break the pattern, to exist loudly and imperfectly, and take up space, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they call you selfish or vindictive or ungrateful, even when you have to watch them face consequences for their choices. I left Dr. Winters' office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. That evening I worked with Margaret Chen to draft a formal demand letter to my parents. The language was legal and precise. Return $500,000 within 30 days or face criminal fraud charges. No threats, no emotion, just clear consequences for documented crimes. I sent it by certified mail and email simultaneously. My mother's response came within an hour, a text message that made my hand shake when I read it. Please don't ruin your sister's wedding. We'll talk after. My mother's text sat on my phone like a lit fuse. We'll talk after. After the wedding. After Emily got what she wanted. After I'd been properly sidelined, hidden behind my pillar, erased from the narrative once again. The assumption that I would simply wait, simply comply, simply disappear on command felt suddenly intolerable. I called Mark immediately. How deep does this go? The money. Emily stole from me is gone, but she's still living like she's wealthy. How is she funding that lifestyle? I was hoping you'd ask that, Mark said, and I could hear the clicking of keyboard keys in the background. I've been digging deeper into Emily's current financial situation. Can I come over? This is easier to show you than explain. He arrived an hour later with his laptop and a file folder thick with printed documents. We sat at my kitchen table and he opened a spreadsheet that looked like a financial autopsy. Your sister is drowning, Kelly, and I mean that literally. She's approximately $200,000 in debt, and that's not counting what she stole from you. The number was so large it felt abstract. How is that even possible? She has a job. She's not living extravagantly. I mean, she posts pictures on social media, but it's just normal stuff. Mark turned his laptop toward me. pulling up Emily's Instagram account. The feed was a carefully curated display of aspirational living, designer handbags artfully arranged on marble countertops, brunch at expensive restaurants with mimosas and aesthetic lighting, vacation photos from tropical locations her engagement ring prominently featured, the life of someone successful, comfortable, enviable. "This is the facade," Mark said, "but look at the metadata on these photos. Most of these designer items appear once and never again. She's buying them, photographing them, and returning them. The restaurants are mostly tagged as promotions or influencer events where she eats free in exchange for posts. The vacation photos are from trips she took years ago reposted with recent captions. She's constructed an entirely fictional life." He pulled up another document, this one showing a web of creditor information. "She has 17,000 in credit card debt across 5 cards, all at maximum limits, 60,000 in business loans from when she started that boutique, now in collections. Another 40,000 owed to private lenders, and those are the ones I could track. There are probably more under the table. She's been dodging collection calls for months. There are 3 active lawsuits filed against her, and 2 more about to be filed. But she's still posting like everything is perfect." "Because everything has to look perfect for this wedding to work," Mark said. "Ethan comes from Money Kelly. His family is well-connected, successful. He makes about $250,000 a year in his corporate position. Emily isn't just marrying him because she loves him, though maybe she does, I can't speak to that. She's marrying him because he's the solution to her financial collapse." He clicked to another file and I recognised Emily's handwriting in what appeared to be digital notes from a cloud storage account. "I accessed her old shared account from when we were all in college. She never changed the password and apparently uses it for personal notes she doesn't want on her phone. These are from the last 6 months." I read the entries, my stomach sinking with each line. "Post-wedding merge accounts immediately. Ease salary covers debts plus lifestyle. Parents can't bail me out anymore. Max them out with the boutique. This has to work." Another entry from 2 months ago. "Kay is the only risk factor. She's been distant, but what if she shows up? What if she talks to E? Need to control the narrative. Need to make sure she stays invisible." The most recent entry was dated just a week ago, right around when the wedding invitations would have been sent. "Told Kay to stand behind pillar. If she objects, she'll look insane who ruins their sister's wedding. E's family will see her as the problem. But better if she just doesn't come at all. Need to think about how to ensure that." "She's been planning this," I said, my voice flat with shock. "The pillar thing wasn't just casual cruelty, it was strategic. Keep me physically out of sight, but if I did try to speak up, make sure I look like the villain." "Kelly, look at this entry from 3 months ago." Mark pointed to a paragraph near the top of the screen. "Kay still doesn't know about the trust fund, according to Mum. Good. Need to keep it that way until after wedding. Once married to E, even if she finds out she can't touch me, will look like jealous sister trying to ruin my happiness. Timing is everything." Emily had known I'd eventually discover the theft. She'd been counting on the wedding happening first, on her being safely married to Ethan before the truth came out. Because a jealous single sister accusing a happy newlywed looked vindictive and unstable. But that same sister, confronting a bride-to-be with evidence of fraud, had a very different optic. "There's more," Mark said, his voice heavy. "I found loan applications Emily filled out last month, trying to get wedding financing. She lied about her income, her debt, her employment history. All of them were denied. So she's been borrowing from friends, telling them she needs help with wedding emergencies or temporary cash flow issues. She owes at least $15,000 to people in her social circle who have no idea they're never getting that money back." I thought about Ethan, the man I'd once connected with, over spreadsheets and quiet conversation. The man Emily had stolen from me with lies the same way she'd stolen Mark. Does Ethan know about any of this? I don't think so. His LinkedIn shows him as financially conservative, risk-averse. He does estate planning and investment management. If he knew Emily was $200,000 in debt and using him as an escape plan, I can't imagine he'd go through with the wedding. Mark closed his laptop and looked at me directly. Kelly, your sister isn't just desperate. She's cornered, and cornered people are dangerous. What do you mean? I mean, she's planned every detail of this wedding as a financial rescue operation. She's counting on merging accounts with Ethan immediately, on having access to his income and assets to dig herself out. She's been systematically cutting off every other option, borrowing from everyone she can, burning through credit-dodging lawsuits. This wedding is her last play. His expression was grim. And you're the one thing that could expose everything before she gets there. Your demand letter to your parents. She knows about that by now. Your mother definitely told her. Emily knows the walls are closing in. I felt a chill run down my spine. So what does that mean for me? Mark's voice was grim when he answered. It means she's not planning a marriage, Kelly. She's planning a robbery, and she'll do anything to protect it. Mark went quiet after delivering that assessment, his expression troubled in a way that made me uneasy. We spent another hour reviewing the financial documents, building a timeline of Emily's descent into desperation. When he left that evening, he hugged me at the door, unusual for us given our complicated history, and said something that struck me as odd at the time. Trust me to do what's right, okay, even if it doesn't look like what you'd choose. I should have asked what he meant, should have pressed for clarification, but I was exhausted from weeks of revelations, from learning that my entire life had been architected around my sister's need to keep me small. I just nodded and watched him leave, thinking he was talking about the legal strategy, about testifying if charges were filed. I didn't know what he was planning. He didn't tell me, and I found out only later that he'd made the decision deliberately to protect me from being implicated in what came next. That night, Mark compiled everything he'd gathered into a comprehensive package. The printed screenshots from Emily's Project K folder, the digital notes where she'd meticulously documented her sabotage of my relationships and opportunities. Entries spanning years, how she'd fabricated rumours about me to Ethan. In graduate school, the fake text messages she'd created to drive Mark away, the emails she'd sent to hiring managers at companies where I'd applied, painting me as difficult or unreliable. Every calculated move she'd made to ensure I stayed isolated, invisible, and dependent on a family that didn't value me. Mark included his own text message history with Emily from 8 years ago, the threats she'd made about his DUI record, the ultimatums she'd delivered. He printed the timeline of my brief connection with Ethan in graduate school, complete with the newsletter photo of us together, and documentation of Emily's sudden transfer to my university, right when Ethan and I were becoming friends. He added Emily's current financial records, the evidence of her massive debt, the loan applications where she'd lied about her income, the private notes revealing her view of Ethan as a financial solution rather than a life partner. And he included one note typed on plain paper with no signature. Ask Emily about Kelly Harrison. Ask her about the trust fund. Ask her about the relationships she destroyed. Then decide if you want to marry her. Everything in this package is verifiable. Check the dates, check the details. The truth has been hidden long enough. Mark told me later that he'd debated for hours whether to send it, knowing it would set events in motion we couldn't control. But he'd thought about the alternative, Emily successfully marrying Ethan, under completely false pretenses, gaining access to his finances, trapping him in a relationship built on deception. And he'd thought about me watching my sister walk down the aisle to marry a man she'd stolen from me, while I stood behind a pillar invisible and erased one more time. He sent the package by overnight courier to Ethan's office, addressed personally marked confidential. No return address, nothing that could trace back to him or to me. I knew none of this at the time. I spent that week working with Margaret Chen on the legal case, filing the formal fraud complaints, documenting the identity theft for the credit bureaus. I froze, my credit contested. The fraudulent accounts began the slow process of trying to repair the financial damage Emily had caused. I called the wedding venue to confirm I was still on the guest list, despite Emily's note about the pillar needing to know if she'd try to have me removed entirely. The coordinator had sounded uncomfortable. "You're listed, but there's a note here that you have a specific assigned position, behind the south pillar during the ceremony. Is that correct? That's what my sister requested, yes?" I'd said, my voice steady despite the humiliation. "That's unusual," the coordinator said carefully. "Most families want everyone visible for photos. Are you sure you're comfortable with that arrangement?" "I'll be there," I'd told her. "Where I stand is between me and my sister." I didn't know that at the same moment I was having that conversation, Ethan was sitting in his office, staring at an unmarked package that had just been delivered. Didn't know he was reading through pages of evidence that would make him question everything he thought he knew about his fiancée. Didn't know Mark had essentially lit a fuse without telling me, giving Ethan 1 week to process the information before the wedding. Mark finally told me what he'd done 3 days later, when I noticed he seemed anxious every time his phone buzzed. "Kelly, I need to tell you something. I sent Ethan the evidence. The Project K folder, the financial records, everything. He's had it for 3 days now." I should have been angry. Should have felt betrayed that Mark had made such a significant decision without consulting me. But instead, I felt something closer to relief. The truth was out there now in the hands of the one person who most needed to know it. Whatever happened next, Emily couldn't control the narrative completely. "How do you know he actually received it?" I asked. I included my old college email address, one Emily doesn't know about, and a note saying he could verify anything in the package. He sent a message yesterday. Just 3 words. "Is this real?" Mark showed me his phone, the email thread. I replied with instructions on how to verify the cloud storage metadata, how to check the dates on the documents, where to find the original sources. He's investigating Kelly. He's looking into it. 5 days before the wedding, Mark received another email from Ethan. This one was longer, more anguished. It confirmed what we'd hoped Ethan had confronted Emily with the folder. Her response would determine everything. Mark's second email from Ethan arrived Wednesday afternoon, and the content made my stomach drop. She cried for 2 hours, said she'd made mistakes when she was younger, but was trying to protect Kelly because Kelly has always been fragile and self-destructive. She showed me texts from Kelly about my mother that were cruel, called her desperate for attention, and said she was using her illness to manipulate me. Said Kelly has been harassing her, threatening to ruin the wedding out of jealousy. Emily seemed genuinely devastated that this was coming out now. I don't know what to believe. The evidence you sent is damning, but she's not denying everything, just reframing it. Says Kelly needs help. I need to think. I read the email 3 times, feeling that old familiar trap closing around me. Even when caught, Emily had found a way to make me the villain. Fragile, self-destructive, jealous. The same words she'd probably been using to poison people against me for years, and now she was using them with Ethan when he'd discovered the truth. She showed him fake texts, I said to Mark, my voice shaking, making it look like I said horrible things about his mother who's dying of cancer. "They're fabricated," Mark said firmly. "Same technique she used with me 8 years ago. She's skilled at it, knows how to make fake screenshots look real, but Ethan's conflicted now. He wants to believe his fiancée wants to think there's an explanation that makes sense. She's given him just enough doubt to keep him questioning. So, the wedding is still on. As of right now, yes, but Emily knows she only bought herself time. She knows Ethan is watching her, questioning her, and she knows you're the threat." Thursday morning, I woke to a missed call from my mother and a text message that made my hands go cold. "Emily had to file a restraining order against you. I'm so disappointed, Kelly. We raised you better than this, threatening your sister, harassing her before her wedding. What's happened to you?" I called Mark immediately. "What restraining order? I haven't contacted Emily in months. I haven't threatened anyone." "Let me check," Mark said, and I heard furious typing. "Kelly, stay calm. This is a desperation move. She's trying to legally prevent you from attending the wedding." More typing. Here it is, filed yesterday in county court. Emergency protective order claiming you've made threatening phone calls, sent harassing messages, and exhibited stalking behaviour. She has 2 witnesses who signed affidavits. Looks like college friends of hers, Jennifer Martinez and Sarah Chen. I don't even know those people. I haven't called Emily, haven't sent messages. This is completely false. I know that, but the judge doesn't know that yet. Emergency restraining orders get granted easily. They're meant to protect people from immediate danger. The evidence bar is low for the initial order. There'll be a full hearing scheduled where you can contest it, but that takes time. Mark's voice was tight with controlled anger. Kelly, if this order is granted, you legally cannot attend the wedding. That's exactly what she wants. Can she do this? Just lie to a court? She already did. Whether it stands is another question. I'm calling a lawyer I know who specialises in this. We need to file an emergency response today. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres, met with me that afternoon. She reviewed Emily's petition with practiced eyes, her expression growing increasingly sceptical. These affidavits are remarkably vague. Threatening behaviour with no specific quotes, harassing phone calls with no call logs or recordings, stalking with no actual evidence of contact. This reads like someone who knows just enough about restraining orders to file one, but doesn't have real evidence to back it up. Because there is no evidence, I said. I haven't contacted my sister in months. The last communication was when I received her wedding invitation. Unfortunately, judges often grant these initial protective orders out of caution planning to sort out the truth at the full hearing. But that hearing won't be until next week after the wedding. Rebecca made notes on her legal pad. We need to file an emergency motion to dismiss, argue that this is retaliatory and intended to interfere with your right to attend a family event you've been invited to. Do you have the wedding invitation? I showed her everything. The original invitation, Emily's handwritten note about standing behind the pillar, my confirmation with the venue coordinator. Rebecca's expression hardened as she read Emily's casual instruction to hide me from photos. This helps significantly. She invited you, gave you specific instructions about where to stand, and now 2 days before the event she's claiming you're a dangerous stalker. The timeline doesn't support her narrative. Rebecca checked her watch. The hearing for the emergency order is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Friday. I'll be there to represent you. But Kelly, I need you to understand, even if we win, even if the judge denies the order, Emily accomplished something by filing it. What do you mean? She's created a record. She's put on the official court record that you're allegedly dangerous, unstable, threatening. Even if the order is denied, that record exists. If anything goes wrong at the wedding, any kind of confrontation or scene, she can point to this filing and say she tried to warn everyone. Rebecca's eyes met mine. She's building a narrative where she's the victim and you're the aggressor. It's strategic and it's calculating. I thought about Ethan's email, Emily's tears and reframing. She was executing multiple defensive strategies simultaneously to convince Ethan I was mentally unstable and jealous, legally prevent me from attending the wedding, and create an official record that supported her victim narrative. She'd spent years making me invisible, and now when I'd finally started to become visible, she was trying to paint that visibility as dangerous harassment. Friday's hearing lasted 20 minutes. The judge reviewed Emily's petition, read Rebecca's emergency response, and asked pointed questions about the lack of specific evidence. He denied the restraining order, citing insufficient proof of actual threats or contact. But he added a warning that made my blood run cold. Ms. Hughes, you're legally permitted to attend your sister's wedding as an invited guest. However, I'm putting on record that any disturbance, any confrontation, any behaviour that could be construed as threatening will result in immediate legal consequences. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. Emily had lost the legal battle, but won the psychological one. I could attend, but with a judicial warning hanging over me. One wrong move, one moment where Emily could claim to feel threatened and I'd face immediate arrest. Rebecca and I left the courthouse just after 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. The wedding was tomorrow, less than 24 hours away. I was permitted to attend, but walking into a trap Emily had carefully constructed. I was home by 6 trying to decide what to wear tomorrow, what to say if anyone asked why I'd been assigned to stand behind a pillar. My phone was charging on the kitchen counter when I heard the knock on my door. Firm official, the kind of knock that makes your heart race, even when you've done nothing wrong. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway, their expressions professionally neutral. The older one spoke first, his voice formal and rehearsed. "Ma'am, you're being served with an emergency restraining order. You cannot go within 500 feet of Emily Harrison or tomorrow's wedding venue." My hands were shaking as I took the papers from the officer. "I don't understand. There was a hearing this morning. The judge denied the restraining order. I was cleared to attend the wedding." The younger officer consulted his notes. "This is a separate filing, ma'am, filed at 3 o'clock this afternoon in family court. Different jurisdiction, different grounds. Judge Carmichael signed the emergency order at 4:30. Different court." Emily had lost the first battle and immediately filed in a different venue, probably hoping I wouldn't have time to respond before the wedding. I looked at the order, my vision blurring as I tried to focus on the legal language. 500 feet from Emily Harrison and the Riverside Estate venue. The venue where the wedding would take place in less than 18 hours. What happens if I violate this order? "Immediate arrest, ma'am. The order is effective as of service, which is right now." He gestured to his body camera. "This interaction is being recorded for documentation. Do you understand the terms of the order?" I understood that my sister had found another way to erase me. Another way to ensure I stayed invisible while she walked down the aisle to marry the man she'd stolen from me, with the money she'd stolen from my inheritance. I understood that she'd spent the day after losing a court, finding a new court, new grounds, new ways to legally silence me. "I understand," I said, my voice hollow. After the officers left, I called Rebecca Torres with trembling fingers. She answered immediately, which meant Mark had probably already contacted her about what was happening. "Kelly," I heard, "I'm already drafting an emergency motion. We need to be in front of a judge tonight." "Tonight, it's Friday evening." Family court has emergency judges available for domestic violence cases and urgent protective order disputes. This qualifies. Emily's order prevents you from attending a family event tomorrow, and the timing is clearly retaliatory. You filed your fraud lawsuit Tuesday. She filed this order today, Friday. That's not coincidence. Rebecca's voice was sharp with controlled fury. "I'm requesting an immediate hearing. There's a judge on call until midnight. Get to the courthouse in 30 minutes. Bring every piece of documentation we used this morning, plus the wedding invitation, plus any communication showing Emily knew you planned to attend." I arrived at the courthouse with Mark, who'd driven over the moment I called him. The building was mostly dark, only the emergency intake offices lit and staffed. Rebecca met us at the security checkpoint, her briefcase overstuffed with documents, her expression that of someone preparing for battle. The hearing took place in a small courtroom with harsh fluorescent lighting. Judge Martinez, an older woman with steel grey hair and reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the competing orders with the weary patience of someone who'd seen every family court manipulation imaginable. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, looking over her glasses at the documentation. "This morning, Judge Patterson denied Ms. Harrison's request for a protective order, finding insufficient evidence of threatening behaviour. This afternoon, Ms. Harrison filed essentially the same petition in family court under slightly different grounds, and Judge Carmichael granted an emergency order. Ms. Torres, what's your argument for why I should overturn Judge Carmichael's order?" Rebecca stood, her posture perfect, her voice steady. "Your Honour, this is retaliation, not protection. Ms. Hughes filed a civil lawsuit for fraud and identity theft against Ms. Harrison on Tuesday. The defendant in that lawsuit, Ms. Hughes' sister Emily, responded by filing this protective order on Friday, 3 days later. The timing is not coincidental. Furthermore, Ms. Harrison specifically invited Ms. Hughes to her wedding, provided written instructions about where Ms. Hughes should stand during the ceremony, and confirmed her attendance with the venue coordinator. This order isn't about safety, it's about silencing a fraud victim. Judge Martinez turned to the affidavits Emily had submitted. These witnesses, Jennifer Martinez and Sarah Chen, claim Ms. Hughes has engaged in threatening behaviour, but there are no specific threats quoted, no police reports filed, no evidence of actual contact. Ms. Torres, does your client have any documented communication with Ms. Harrison in the past month? None, Your Honour. The last contact was receiving the wedding invitation 6 weeks ago. Ms. Hughes has not called, texted, emailed, or attempted any contact with her sister since that time. The judge looked at me directly. Ms. Hughes, do you intend to cause a disturbance at this wedding? I stood feeling the weight of that question. No, Your Honour. I intend to attend as an invited guest. My sister requested that I stand behind a pillar during the ceremony so I wouldn't appear in photographs. I found that request hurtful, but I plan to comply. I just want to be present for my sister's wedding, even if she's made it clear she doesn't want me to be visible. Something shifted in Judge Martinez's expression. She looked at Emily's handwritten note about the pillar which Rebecca had submitted as evidence. Your sister asked you to hide during her wedding ceremony. Yes, Your Honour, behind the south pillar, so I wouldn't be in any photos. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to the prosecutor representing Emily's petition. Does your client have any evidence, any at all, of actual threatening behaviour, specific threats, documented attempts at contact, anything beyond the vague claims in these affidavits? The prosecutor, a young man who looked uncomfortable with his assignment, shuffled through his papers. The affidavits from the witnesses, who are close friends of the bride, Judge Martinez interrupted. Not neutral parties. No police reports, no documented threats, no evidence of contact. She removed her glasses. Here's what I see: a family dispute that has escalated into dueling legal actions. A bride who invited her sister to her wedding, but now claims that same sister is threatening. And a sister who filed a fraud lawsuit that appears to have triggered this protective order as retaliation. She looked at me again. Ms. Hughes, I'm going to allow you to attend this wedding, but I want to be absolutely clear about the conditions. She outlined the terms carefully. I could attend as a guest. I could not approach Emily directly. I could not cause any disturbance or scene, and any behaviour that could reasonably be construed as threatening would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. If Emily felt uncomfortable with my presence at any point, security could escort me out and I would be required to leave without protest. Do you understand these terms, Ms. Hughes? I understand, Your Honour. As we left the courthouse well after 10 o'clock Friday night, Rebecca put a hand on my shoulder. Kelly, you won the right to be there, but Emily set this up perfectly. Any reaction you have tomorrow, any emotion, any words, anything she can frame as threatening or disturbing, and you're in handcuffs. She forced the court to build her a trap. I understood completely. I could attend the wedding, but I had to be perfect, controlled, silent. I had to be invisible in every way except physical presence. The irony was almost poetic. Emily had spent my entire life demanding I disappear, and now, even when I'd fought for the legal right to exist in the same space as her, I'd been ordered to behave as if I didn't. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what you wear to a wedding where you've been explicitly told to hide, where your presence has been legally contested, where your own family has chosen your tormentor over you repeatedly. I chose a simple navy dress, elegant but understated, professional, unremarkable. The kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention, wouldn't give anyone ammunition to claim I was trying to upstage the bride or cause problems. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought about my grandmother's letter. Permission to stop disappearing. Permission to take up space. I was going to that wedding, and this time I wouldn't stand behind any pillar. Mark picked me up at noon, 3 hours before the ceremony. We drove to the Riverside estate in silence, both of us understanding that words couldn't adequately prepare me for what was coming. The venue was stunning in that ostentatious way that screamed expense, manicured gardens, a grand marble staircase leading to the ceremony pavilion, crystal chandeliers visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This was Emily's stage, carefully constructed, and I was about to step onto it. The parking lot was already filling with luxury cars. I recognised some of the guests arriving, distant relatives, family friends, people who'd known both of us growing up, but who probably couldn't have told you a single meaningful fact about my life. Mark squeezed my hand before we got out of the car. Whatever happens, I'm right beside you. The venue coordinator met us at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her professional smile faltering slightly when she checked my name. "Oh, you're the behind-pillar guest. Right this way, please." She said it so matter-of-factly, as if directing someone to their designated humiliation spot was a normal part of event coordination. She led us through the main ceremony space, past rows of white chairs, decorated with silk ribbons and flowers, past the aisle where Emily would make her grand entrance. The south pillar was exactly as I'd imagined, a massive marble column that provided structural support for the vaulted ceiling and completely blocked the view of anyone standing behind it. There was no chair, just a small designated standing area. I would spend the entire ceremony on my feet, hidden invisible to every camera angle, every guest's line of sight, every moment that would be recorded and remembered. "This is your spot," the coordinator said, her voice carrying a hint of apology she probably wasn't supposed to show. "The ceremony starts in 30 minutes. Please remain here once it begins." I looked at that pillar, at the deliberate cruelty of its positioning, and felt something crystallize inside me. Emily had planned this, long before the restraining orders, long before my discovery of the stolen inheritance. This erasure had always been the point. Mark stood beside me as guests filtered in, filling the seats I couldn't see from my hidden position. I heard my parents arrive, heard my mother's laugh as she greeted someone, heard my father's voice booming with pride about our daughter's big day. Neither of them looked for me. Neither checked whether I'd actually made it despite Emily's legal attempts to bar me. I simply didn't exist to them in any way that mattered. The string quartet began playing, signalling the ceremony's start. I heard the rustle of fabric as guests stood, heard the collective intake of breath that meant the bride had appeared. I couldn't see Emily, couldn't see her dress or her face or the moment everyone had gathered to witness. But I knew the instant she saw me, tucked in my assigned shadow, because I heard her footsteps pause for just a fraction of a second on her way down the aisle. Then they continued, and I imagined the triumphant smile she must be wearing. Everything had worked. She'd gotten away with it all. The minister's voice carried through the space, warm and practiced, welcoming everyone to celebrate this union. I listened to the traditional words, the promises about love and commitment, and thought about everything those words meant when spoken by people who'd systematically lied to each other. When Emily's voice spoke her vows, I heard the tremor in it, in nerves or fear I couldn't tell. Then during the ring exchange, Emily's voice rose slightly pitched to carry to the front rows. "Our baby will be so happy today." The words were wrapped in emotion, delivered like a precious secret she couldn't quite contain. Guests gasped. I heard my mother's delighted cry, heard congratulations rippling through the crowd. Ethan stood silent, and even from my hidden position, I could feel the weight of that silence. She'd done it, deployed her final defensive weapon. A pregnancy announcement, real or fake, I couldn't know, that would make her untouchable. Who would dare confront a pregnant bride? Who would risk being cast as the villain who attacked an expectant mother? The minister continued, reaching the traditional moment that felt almost surreal given everything that had preceded it. If anyone present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched. I felt every person in that room holding their breath, including me. This was it. The moment Emily had feared enough to file 2 restraining orders to manufacture evidence to wage legal warfare. The moment I could speak, could expose everything, could finally stop being invisible. I stood stepping out from behind the pillar just enough that I could see the ceremony. See Emily in her elaborate white dress, see Ethan standing rigid at the altar. See my parents in the front row, already turning to look for the source of disruption they'd been primed to expect. I met Emily's eyes across the space, and I said nothing, not a word. I just stood there, visible, present, refusing to hide. Emily's face registered confusion, then relief, then triumph. She'd won. I was going to stay silent after all, too afraid of arrest or family rejection to actually speak. Then Ethan's voice cut through the silence, clear and steady, and utterly unexpected. "I object." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Emily's face went white. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan turned to face the congregation, his posture rigid, with the kind of tension that comes from making an impossible decision. "I received information last week, an anonymous package containing documentation of things I couldn't believe, things I didn't want to believe." His voice carried across the stunned silence. "I spent days trying to disprove it, checking dates, verifying sources, hoping I'd find evidence it was fake. I couldn't, because it wasn't fake, it was all true." Emily reached for his arm, her voice pitched with desperation. "Ethan, please, not here. Whatever you think you know, we can talk about it privately." "I asked you directly." Ethan continued, pulling away from her touch. "3 days ago, I showed you the evidence and asked for an explanation. You cried. You told me Kelly was mentally unstable, that she'd fabricated the things out of jealousy. You showed me texts where Kelly supposedly said horrible things about my mother. And I wanted to believe you, Emily. I wanted to believe the woman I was about to marry wasn't capable of what these documents showed." He pulled folded papers from his jacket pocket, and I recognised the format, even from my distance printouts from Emily's Project K folder. Mark's evidence package. Ethan unfolded them with deliberate care, his hand steady despite the tremor in his voice. "These are notes from Emily's personal files, dated entries spanning 5 years documenting systematic sabotage of her sister's life." He began reading, his voice flat with the horror of it. "March 2019. Told Ethan that Kay laughed about his scholarship background. He looked crushed. Mission accomplished. June 2020, Kay applied to Morrison Consulting, called my friend Sarah in HR, told her Kay had been fired from previous job for cause. Kay didn't get interview. January 2021, Mark is getting too close to Kay. Need to eliminate him. Found his DUI record, perfect leverage. The gasps from the congregation grew louder with each entry. I saw my mother's face, confusion giving way to dawning horror. My father sat frozen, unable or unwilling to process what he was hearing. Emily lunged for the papers, her composure shattering. "Those are private. You had no right." But Ethan stepped back smoothly, holding the documents out of her reach. "Private documentation of criminal behaviour," he said. "Blackmail, fraud, systematic destruction of your sister's relationships and opportunities." He looked at her and there was something like grief in his expression. "Emily, I asked you 3 days ago to tell me the truth. You lied. You showed me fake texts. You told me Kelly was the problem." His voice dropped. "And then, this morning, you announced a pregnancy I knew nothing about." Emily's face transformed, tears springing instantly to her eyes, in that practiced way I'd seen 1,000 times. "I was going to tell you privately. I wanted it to be special, but with everything happening, I just..." She pressed a hand to her stomach. "I'm carrying your child, Ethan, our baby. How can you humiliate me like this in front of everyone?" The room held its breath. It was masterful manipulation, and I watched several guests' expressions shift toward sympathy for Emily. A pregnant bride being abandoned at the altar, it would make Ethan look monstrous. But Ethan's response was quiet, measured, and devastating in its simplicity. "Show me the test. Right now. St. Mary's Hospital is across the street. We can walk over together, get a blood test. Takes 2 minutes to confirm. If you're pregnant, if you're telling the truth, I'll apologize in front of everyone here." He held out his hand. "Let's go." Emily went very still. The tears stopped, as if a faucet had been turned off. The test is at home. I didn't bring it." "Then let's get a new test. Right now. 2 minutes." Ethan's hand remained extended, his expression showing he already knew what her answer would be. "Unless you're not actually pregnant, unless this was another lie, another manipulation to control the situation, when the truth started coming out." Emily's silence was confirmation enough. Guests began murmuring, the narrative shifting again. My mother started to speak, but before she could, another figure rose from the front row. Ethan's mother moved slowly, her frailty evident in every careful step, but her expression was clear and fierce. She was tiny, diminished by illness, but her presence commanded attention. She walked past Emily without a glance, made her way to where I still stood by the pillar, and took my hand in both of hers. "My son told me about you years ago," she said, her voice soft, but carrying in the shocked silence. "After he met you in graduate school, he came home for Thanksgiving and talked about the woman who understood spreadsheets the way poets understand rhythm, who showed up early to everything and brought 2 pens in case one ran out of ink, who treated the janitors with the same respect as the professors." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "He was going to ask you out, and then he met your sister, and suddenly you didn't exist anymore." She turned to face Ethan, still holding my hand. "I told you, sweetheart. The day you brought Emily home, I told you she wasn't right. That there was something calculated in her charm. I told you Kelly was the one with real substance. You didn't listen. You wanted to believe Emily was who she pretended to be." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "But you're listening now. Finally." Emily's voice turned shrill, panic overwhelming her practiced composure. "You don't understand. None of you understand. Kelly is the liar here. She's been manipulating all of you, playing the victim when she's the one who—" She fumbled in her small bridal bag, pulling out folded papers with shaking hands. "I have proof, real proof, not whatever fake document she had someone create." She held up the papers triumphantly, and I recognized the format even from across the room. Official legal paper, formatted like estate documents. Emily's voice rose with desperate confidence as she addressed the congregation. "This is my grandmother's will, the real one, the one that shows Kelly has been lying about everything." Emily held the document high, her hands shaking but her voice gaining strength from sheer desperation. "This will is dated 6 months after the one Kelly claims exists. Grandmother changed her mind. She was disappointed in Kelly for abandoning the family, for never visiting her in those final months. She left everything to me because I was there for her when Kelly couldn't be bothered." I felt Ethan's mother's grip tighten on my hand, but I couldn't speak. The judge's warning echoed in my mind. Any disturbance meant immediate arrest. I had to stay silent, had to let this play out, even as I watched Emily try to rewrite history one more time. Emily began reading from the forged document, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I, Margaret Harrison, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke my previous will and testament. I leave the entirety of my estate to my granddaughter, Emily Harrison, who has shown true devotion and love. My granddaughter Kelly has proven herself cold and distant, caring more for her career than her family. She has shown me no love in my final years, and I cannot, in good conscience, leave her what she has not earned through—" "Stop." The voice came from near the entrance, clear and professional. Margaret Chen walked down the aisle with the confident stride of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. She dressed formally clearly, anticipating she might need to intervene in an official capacity. Ms. Harrison, I'm Margaret Chen, attorney for Kelly Hughes and executor of your grandmother's actual estate. I'm going to need to see that document. Emily clutched the papers to her chest. This is a private family matter. You just read from it publicly at a wedding ceremony. It's no longer private. Margaret's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. And if you're claiming that's a valid will, we need to verify it immediately, because I have the actual will on file with the probate court. She pulled out her phone, swiped to speaker mode, and dialed without waiting for permission. The phone rang twice before a recorded message began. You've reached Lane County Probate Court. If you know your party's extension. Margaret pressed numbers rapidly, navigating the automated system with practiced ease. Within seconds, a live voice answered. Probate records, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, this is Margaret Chen, attorney identification number 847392. I need immediate verification of a will on file for Margaret Eleanor Harrison, deceased August 2015. Can you confirm the date of the most recent will filed for that decedent? The sound of typing filled the shocked silence of the venue. I have one will on file for Margaret Eleanor Harrison, dated February 12th, 2015, filed for probate September 2015. No subsequent wills filed. Margaret's eyes remained fixed on Emily. Can you confirm that date is the only will your system shows for that decedent? Correct. One will only dated February 2015. Would you like me to email you the official filing confirmation? Yes, please, to my office email. Thank you, Jennifer. Margaret ended the call and addressed the congregation, her voice carrying the authority of irrefutable fact. Wills must be filed with the probate court after someone's death. That's not optional, it's legally required for the will to be valid and enforceable. The court has one will on file for your grandmother dated February 2015. The document your sister is holding doesn't exist in any legal record because it's a forgery. Emily's face had gone white, but she tried one more desperate pivot. Maybe it wasn't filed yet. Maybe the lawyer... Your grandmother died 10 years ago, Margaret interrupted. If this will existed and was legitimate, it would have been filed within months of her death. That's standard legal practice and required by law. She held out her hand. I'll need to examine that document now, as it appears to be a fraudulent legal instrument being presented as authentic. Ethan's mother released my hand and took a slow step toward Emily. Despite her frailty, her voice cut through the chaos with quiet devastation. I visited your grandmother every week in hospice, Emily. Every single week for the last 8 months of her life. She talked about both of you constantly. Her eyes were sharp with memory and purpose. She told me specifically about the money she was leaving Kelly. Said, Emily has her parents' support and always will, but Kelly only has me, and I need to make sure she has something they can't take away. Those were her exact words. The old woman's gaze moved to the forged document in Emily's hands. Your grandmother would never have written what you just read. She knew Kelly was distant because your family made her feel invisible. She didn't blame Kelly for that, she blamed your parents. And she certainly wouldn't have praised you for devotion when you visited her exactly 3 times in those final 8 months, and 2 of those visits were to ask for money. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily stood frozen, the forged will trembling in her hands, her carefully constructed defences crumbling around her. Every lie exposed, every manipulation revealed, witnessed by everyone who'd gathered to celebrate her triumph. Then a man's voice came from the back of the venue, cutting through the devastated quiet with grim purpose. If we're sharing what Emily owes, I'd like to go next. All heads turned toward the back of the venue, where a man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit, walked down the aisle with the measured pace of someone who'd made this kind of entrance before. He had the weathered face of someone who'd seen too many desperate people make too many promises they couldn't keep. "My name is David Brennan," he said, his voice carrying the professional courtesy of a businessman conducting an unpleasant transaction. "I'm a private lender based in Portland. I apologize for interrupting what should be a joyous occasion, but given the current discussion about what Ms. Harrison owes and to whom I believe my information is relevant." Emily's face had gone from white to grey. "David, this isn't the time." "I disagree," he said calmly, stopping a few rows from the altar. "I've been trying to collect a debt from you for 6 months, Ms. Harrison. You've avoided my calls, ignored my letters, and failed to appear at 2 scheduled meetings. I came to this wedding as a last resort, hoping to speak with you privately. But since we're apparently having a public accounting, let's account." He pulled a folder from inside his jacket, the gesture smooth and practiced. 18 months ago, Emily Harrison borrowed $75,000 from my lending firm. The terms were standard repayment over 2 years with reasonable interest. When I questioned the security for such a large personal loan, Ms. Harrison assured me she had a family inheritance coming that would more than cover the debt. I felt my stomach drop. Emily had borrowed against my inheritance money that was already stolen to fund more of her fabricated lifestyle. For the first 6 months, payments were sporadic, but present, Brennan continued. Then they stopped entirely. When I contacted Ms. Harrison 8 months ago, she became quite emotional. Told me her sister was maliciously withholding the inheritance, blocking her access to funds that were rightfully hers. She even showed me legal documents claiming her sister had filed restraining orders preventing her from accessing family assets. He looked directly at me for the first time. "I'm assuming you're Kelly Harrison, later Kelly Hughes." "Yes," I said quietly, the first word I'd spoken since the ceremony began. "Then I apologize. The documents your sister showed me were apparently fabricated. They made it appear you were engaged in some kind of financial elder abuse, preventing your sister from accessing your grandmother's estate. The documents looked legitimate enough that I granted her an extension." His voice hardened. "That was my mistake. I've since learned those documents were as fake as the will she just attempted to present." Murmurs rippled through the guests. I saw several people pulling out phones, probably Googling Emily's name, probably finding the lawsuits Mark had mentioned. Last month, when I informed Ms. Harrison that I would be pursuing legal action for the unpaid debt, she became hysterical. Brennan's expression remained neutral, but his words landed like hammer blows. She locked herself in her apartment bathroom and called 911, claiming she'd overdosed on pills. Paramedics responded. They found her with a bottle of vitamin C supplements. No actual overdose, no medical emergency, just a performance designed to delay the inevitable legal consequences. A woman in the 4th row gasped. She did that at Sarah's birthday party 2 years ago, when Sarah confronted her about money Emily had borrowed and never repaid. Emily locked herself in the bathroom, we had to call paramedics, and then it turned out she'd just taken aspirin. We thought she was genuinely in crisis. Another voice, a man I didn't recognise. She pulled something similar at the boutique closing. When the landlord demanded back rent, Emily had what looked like a panic attack so severe we called an ambulance. The EMT said there was nothing medically wrong. The pattern was emerging, witnessed and confirmed by multiple people. Emily's manipulation wasn't hidden. It had just never been compiled into a single narrative before. Each person who'd experienced it had thought they were dealing with an isolated incident, a one-time crisis. No one had realised it was a systematic strategy. Brennan turned to face Ethan directly. "Mr. Mitchell, 2 weeks ago, your fiancée contacted me with what she called good news. She informed me that once you were married, you would be taking care of her financial obligations like a good husband should. She sent me documentation of your income, your investment portfolio, and your family's net worth. I'm guessing you didn't authorise her to share that information." Ethan's face had gone rigid. "I absolutely did not." She told me you'd agreed to assume her debts as part of the marriage, that you viewed it as starting fresh together. She asked me to hold off on legal action until after the wedding, when you'd have access to her accounts and could arrange payment. Brennan's expression held something like pity. Mr. Mitchell, I don't know what you thought you were marrying into, but from my professional perspective, you weren't marrying a partner. You were being recruited as a bailout for someone who's been in financial freefall for over 2 years. Emily's scream cut through the venue like breaking glass. Everyone is lying. All of you. You're all lying because you're jealous, or you want money, or you... She whirled toward where our parents sat in the front row, her voice climbing toward hysteria. Mom, Dad, tell them how Kelly has always been jealous of me, how she's tried to ruin my life since we were kids. Tell them about all the times she... But when she turned to our parents, searching for the support that had always been there, she found them staring at the floor. My father's face had gone red, his jaw clenched. My mother's hands were clasped in her lap, her shoulders shaking. Neither of them would meet Emily's eyes. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents choose silence over defending Emily. And in that moment, I saw something break in my sister's expression that went deeper than embarrassment or fear. She'd lost her last shield, and she knew it. My father stood abruptly, the movement so sudden, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face was red, his breathing heavy, and when he spoke, his voice cracked with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. Emily, stop. Just stop. He turned away from her, facing the congregation of guests who'd become unwilling witnesses to our family's complete unravelling. My daughter is right that this is complicated, but not in the way she thinks, not in the way any of us have wanted to acknowledge. My mother reached for his arm, but he gently pulled away, standing alone in a way that looked physically painful for him. I need to say something. I should have said it 30 years ago, but I was too much of a coward. I'm still a coward, but at least now I can admit it in front of everyone. The vulnerability in his voice silenced even the whispers. My father, who'd always been so certain, so authoritative, suddenly looked like a man who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. I was the youngest of 3 brothers. He began, his voice steadier now, but heavy with old pain. My oldest brother was brilliant, charismatic, everything my father wanted in a son. My middle brother was athletic, popular, made friends wherever he went, and I was the leftover, the one who didn't quite measure up to either of them. My father made it clear every day of my childhood that I was the disappointment. He paused, swallowing hard. When my parents died, they left the house, the business, everything of value to my older brother. I got $5,000 and a note saying they hoped I'd make something of myself despite our doubts. I was 28 years old, married to your mother, and I received a note telling me my own parents doubted I'd ever amount to anything. I'd never heard any of this, never knew my father had brothers, never knew about this inheritance disparity, never understood there was this wound underneath everything. When Emily was born, he continued, his voice breaking. She looked exactly like my mother, same eyes, same smile, same expressions. My mother, the only person in my family who'd ever made me feel like I mattered, who died when I was 19. Seeing her face in my daughter's face, I made a decision without even realizing I was making it. I gave Emily everything I'd never had. Every advantage, every opportunity, every ounce of attention and approval. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw tears streaming down his face. I told myself I was protecting her, being a better father than mine had been. Actually, I was repeating the same pattern that destroyed me, just inverting the roles. I made Emily the favourite, the important one, the child who mattered. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And I made you invisible, Kelly. The same way my father made me invisible. I knew exactly how that felt, the pain of being overlooked, the wound of being dismissed, and I did it to you anyway. The venue had gone completely silent. Even Emily had stopped her desperate protest, staring at our father with an expression I couldn't read. Your grandmother saw it, Dad continued. She watched me fail you year after year. She pulled me aside at Kelly's high school graduation. You'd graduated with honours, Kelly full scholarship to university, and she told me I was making the same mistakes my father made. She said, "John, you're not healing your wounds, you're just inflicting them on a different child." He pressed his hand over his face, shoulders shaking. She was right, and I told her I'd do better. I promised her I'd change. And then I went right back to choosing Emily over you every single time. He looked at me directly now, his face devastated. Your grandmother left you that money because she knew I'd failed you. She knew your mother and I couldn't be trusted to treat you fairly. She tried to protect you from us, to give you something we couldn't take away. And we took it anyway. His voice broke completely. We signed those trustee documents. We authorised the transfer. Your mother and I walked into a notary's office and swore we'd witnessed you sign papers we knew you'd never seen. We committed fraud. We perjured ourselves. Because Emily needed money and we told ourselves it was borrowing, that we'd pay it back, that it was for the family. My mother made a small sound, almost a whimper, but Dad continued. That makes us complicit in theft, in forgery, in destroying your credit in every crime Emily committed. Because we enabled every single one. We taught her that there were no consequences for hurting you. We taught her that your pain didn't matter as much as her comfort. We taught her to be a monster, and then we gave her the tools to destroy you. He wiped his eyes, looking at me with an expression of complete brokenness. I don't expect forgiveness, Kelly. I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that I see now what I did, what we did. Your grandmother tried to warn me. She tried to protect you. And even after she died, I kept failing you. I'm so deeply, devastatingly sorry. The silence that followed was profound. I stood frozen, unable to process this sudden honesty from the man who'd spent my entire life looking past me. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to have finally heard him acknowledge what he'd done. But mostly I just felt hollow, watching a man admit he'd consciously chosen to repeat his own trauma onto his child. Then my mother's voice cut through the quiet, barely a whisper, but somehow carrying across the space. John, stop. If we're being honest, if we're really being honest, they need to see this. She reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a small notebook, the cover worn and faded from years of handling. The room held its breath as she stood clutching the notebook to her chest. There's more, she said, her voice hollow. There's so much more they need to know. My mother stood there, clutching that small notebook, and something in her posture reminded me of how she looked when I was 7 years old and she'd forgotten to pick me up from school. That same combination of guilt and helplessness, the expression of someone who knew they'd done wrong but couldn't quite bring themselves to make it right. 5 years into our marriage, I started seeing a therapist. She said, her voice so quiet people in the back rows leaned forward to hear. I was struggling with anxiety, with feelings I couldn't name. The therapist suggested I keep a journal, write down the things I couldn't say out loud. She thought it would help me process. Mum's laugh was bitter and broken. It helped me document, but it didn't help me change. She opened the notebook to a page marked with a faded receipt, her hand shaking as she read. May 15th, 2001, Kelly scored 98% on her math final, highest in her grade. She ran into the kitchen to tell us, her face glowing. I was helping Emily practice for her dance recital. I said, "That's nice, honey," and turned back to Emily. Didn't ask to see the test. Didn't celebrate. Kelly put the paper in her backpack and went to her room. I wrote this entry at midnight feeling guilty, but the next morning I still didn't mention it. Still didn't make it matter. The date echoed in my memory. I remembered that test, remembered thinking if I just scored high enough, maybe they'd finally see me. I'd gotten the highest grade, and it had earned me 3 words and a dismissal. Mum flipped to another page chosen at random from years of entries. November 2002. Emily threw a tantrum because Kelly's bedroom was 2 feet wider than hers. She screamed for over an hour through things, said we loved Kelly more. We didn't love Kelly more, we barely noticed Kelly at all. But Emily's rage was unbearable, and Kelly's sadness was always so quiet. So, we switched their rooms. Kelly helped pack her own things without complaint. When I checked on her that night, she was crying silently into her pillow, but she stopped when she saw me. I wrote this at 2 a.m, unable to sleep. But I never switched the rooms back, never admitted it was wrong. Just let Kelly learn that her feelings mattered less than Emily's noise. I remembered that room switch, remembered packing my belongings, remembered Emily's triumphant smile, remembered learning that lesson. My pain only counted if I made a scene, and I was never going to make a scene. Mum continued reading, tears streaming down her face now. June 2007. Kelly's college graduation party was today. We'd planned it for weeks. Then Emily called, crying her boyfriend broke up with her. She needed us. So we cancelled Kelly's party, told her we'd reschedule. We never did. Kelly said, "It's fine, Mum. I understand." She always understood, always made herself smaller. I wrote this entry. I chose Emily's breakup over Kelly's milestone. Again, when will I stop doing this? When will I be brave enough to tell Emily no? 10 years later, I still haven't answered that question. Each entry was a knife. Evidence that every slight, every dismissal, every time I'd been pushed aside, it had all been witnessed, documented, acknowledged as wrong in the privacy of my mother's journal, while in real life the pattern continued unchanged. Entry after entry, Mum said, her voice cracking. Year after year, 25 years of writing about how guilty I felt, how wrong it was, how I knew Kelly was being hurt. But I never stopped it, never chose differently. I saw everything, every injustice, every time Kelly made herself smaller to make room for Emily, every time we chose Emily's temporary comfort over Kelly's basic dignity. I documented it because I felt guilty, but feeling guilty isn't the same as making change. She walked towards me, her steps slow and heavy, like someone approaching a grave they dug themselves. This journal is evidence of my cowardice, Kelly, not my compassion. I saw you suffering, and I wrote about it instead of stopping it. I witnessed your erasure, and I preserved the record while doing nothing to prevent it. She held out the notebook, and I took it with numb fingers. It was heavier than it should have been, weighted with decades of acknowledged failures. I don't expect forgiveness, Mum said, meeting my eyes for what felt like the first time in years. I'm giving you this so you know you weren't crazy. It did happen. You weren't overly sensitive or dramatic or selfish for wanting to be seen. Every hurt you felt, I saw it too. I documented it. I knew it was wrong. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And I chose wrong anyway, every single time. For 33 years, I chose wrong. I stood there holding that journal, physical proof that my pain had been real, visible, and deliberately ignored. The validation I'd craved my entire life, but it came wrapped in the devastating knowledge that my mother had known all along and simply decided Emily's comfort was worth more than my dignity. The venue was completely silent. Even Emily had gone still, staring at our mother with an expression that might have been betrayal, or might have been recognition that she too had been damaged by this family's choices, just in a different way. I felt Ethan's mother squeeze my arm gently, encouragingly. I felt Mark's presence somewhere behind me, steady and supportive. I felt the weight of my grandmother's letter in my mind, her permission to stop disappearing. And finally, after 33 years of being told my voice didn't matter, after a lifetime of making myself small, after being legally threatened to stay silent at this very wedding, I spoke. I need to say something. My voice came out stronger than I'd expected, clear and steady. Not to defend myself, everyone here has already heard the truth. I need to speak to free myself from 33 years of silence. I stepped away from the pillar, completely moving to where everyone could see me without obstruction. Not hiding, not shrinking, not apologizing with my posture for taking up space. Just standing there, visible and present, holding my mother's journal like the evidence it was. For 33 years, I believed a story about myself. I began, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. I believed that being easy, being small, being invisible, made me good. I thought if I needed less, if I complained less, if I simply took up less space in the world, then maybe you'd love me more. Maybe I'd finally be worth noticing. I looked at my parents, then at Emily, then at the congregation of people who'd known me my whole life but had never really seen me. I was wrong. You didn't love me more because I was small. You just forgot I needed love at all. My invisibility wasn't virtue, it was convenience. I made myself easy to overlook, and you were grateful for it because it meant you could focus on the person who demanded attention. My father's shoulders shook with sobs, but I kept speaking. This wasn't cruelty, it was truth. Emily, I want you to hear this directly from me. I turned to face my sister, who stood frozen in her wedding dress, her carefully constructed world in ruins around her. You spent your entire life terrified I would take your place. That's what all of this was about, wasn't it? The sabotage, the lies, the systematic destruction of anything good in my life. You were afraid that if anyone saw me clearly, they'd choose me instead of you. Emily's face crumpled, but I continued gently. But I was never competing with you. I never wanted to take anything from you. I just wanted to exist in the same family without disappearing. I wanted to be someone's daughter, someone's sister without having to earn it by being less than I was. That's all I ever wanted, just to exist without apologizing for it. I turned back to my parents. Mum. Dad, I heard what you said. I understand now about the wounds you carried, about the pain that made you repeat patterns you knew were destructive. Understanding why you did it doesn't mean I have to accept what you did. You had choices. Not once, not accidentally, but every single day for 33 years. Thousands of individual moments where you chose Emily's comfort over my basic dignity. My mother's face was streaked with tears, her hand pressed over her mouth. Every good grade I didn't celebrate. Every achievement you minimized. Every time Emily took something from me and you told me to be the bigger person, to understand, to let it go. Those were choices. You chose to make me smaller so Emily could feel bigger. You chose her tantrums over my silence. You chose her immediate happiness over my long-term well-being. I held up the journal. And, Mum, you documented it. For 25 years, you wrote down your guilt, your recognition that what you were doing was wrong. But guilt without change isn't remorse. It's just documentation. You watched me shrink and you preserved the record while doing nothing to stop it. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and complete. I felt lighter for having spoken it, for having finally named what had been done to me in front of witnesses who couldn't pretend not to understand. I came here today, prepared to stand behind a pillar one last time. I said, my voice steady and clear. That's what Emily asked me to do. Hide during the ceremony so I wouldn't be in photographs. I was going to do it. I was going to make myself invisible again, because that's what I've been trained to do for 33 years. I looked at the marble column that had been my assigned position, that physical representation of everything my family had asked me to be. But my grandmother didn't leave me money to hide. She left it so I could stop hiding. She saw what you couldn't or wouldn't see, that I was disappearing, and she tried to give me permission to stop. My voice gained strength. I'm done teaching people that my pain doesn't matter. I'm done making myself small so others can feel big. I'm done calling silence peace, when what it really was permission for you to take from me, to erase me, to treat me like I was less important than everyone else's comfort. I looked around the room at all these people who'd been complicit in their own ways, who'd watched me be pushed aside at family gatherings and said nothing, who'd heard Emily take credit for my ideas and remained silent. Every time I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, I taught you my pain didn't count. I taught you that you could hurt me without consequence. That ends today. My final words came out like a promise I was making to myself, as much as a statement to them. I will not stand behind any pillar, literal or metaphorical, ever again. I will not shrink to make room for people who never made room for me. I will not apologise for existing, for having needs, for taking up space in the world. I am done disappearing. The silence that followed felt different from all the silences that had come before it. This one wasn't about people not knowing what to say. It was about people finally understanding what had been happening all along. I turned to walk toward the exit, ready to leave this place, and these people behind, ready to start building a life where I didn't have to earn the right to exist. But before I'd taken 3 steps, Emily's voice stopped me, small and broken, and completely unlike the confident, manipulative woman who'd orchestrated so much of my pain. "Wait, please," her voice cracked. "You're right about all of it. Please don't go yet." I stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to leave Emily standing there in her ruined wedding dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies. But another part, the part that had spent 33 years hoping my sister would finally see me, needed to hear what she would say now that she had nothing left to hide behind. When I turned, Emily had sunk down onto the altar steps, her elaborate white dress pooling around her like a collapsed parachute. Her makeup was streaked with tears, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. She looked nothing like the triumphant bride who'd walked down that aisle an hour ago. She looked small and broken and terrifyingly human. "I was 8 years old," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying in the absolute silence of the venue. 8 years old, when I heard Grandma talking to Mrs. Chen from next door. I was supposed to be asleep, but I'd come downstairs for water. They were in the kitchen drinking tea, and I heard Grandma say your name. She looked at me, directly for the first time, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Not manipulation or calculation, but something raw and undefended. She said, "Kelly will be the strong one, the one who survives on her own. Emily will always need help. She'll always need someone to catch her." I stood there in the hallway in my pajamas, and I felt something break inside me, because I knew she was right. Even at 8, I knew I was the weak one, the one who needed constant reassurance, the one who couldn't handle anything without falling apart. Emily's hands twisted in her lap, destroying the delicate fabric of her dress. I spent the next 25 years trying to prove her wrong, trying to prove I didn't need anyone, that I was the capable one, the successful one, the one who had everything together. I had to be better than you at everything, because if you were the strong one and I was the weak one, then what did that make me? Just the burden, just the problem. Jewish child who would never amount to anything without help. Her voice broke completely, and I became exactly what Grandma predicted. Someone who needs help. Someone who can't function without taking from others. Someone who destroys everything she touches because she's too desperate and too scared to just ask for what she needs. She stood slowly, using the altar for support, and I saw how exhausted she looked beneath the tears. "You want to know why I took everything from you? Why I sabotaged your relationships, your jobs, every good thing that came into your life?" She laughed, bitter and broken. "Because you had the one thing I could never steal, no matter how hard I tried. You were enough just as you were. You didn't need constant validation, constant proof that you mattered. You just existed quietly and competently, and that was sufficient." Emily took a shaky breath. "I needed everyone to tell me I was special, I was important, I was worth loving. I needed constant proof, because deep down, I knew what Grandma knew, that I was weak. But you, her voice filled with something that sounded like anguish. You were strong without even trying. You survived being ignored, being dismissed, being erased, and you still showed up. Still tried, still maintained your dignity, even when we treated you like you had none. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing makeup further. I hated you for that. Hated that you could be strong without all the props and performance I needed. Hated that you didn't need what I needed. So I tried to take it from you. Tried to make you as desperate and broken as I felt inside. Because if you fell apart too, then maybe I wasn't so weak after all. The honesty was devastating, not because it excused anything, but because it revealed just how much damage our family's dynamics had done to both of us. Emily had been destroyed by being given everything. I'd been destroyed by being given nothing. Different paths to the same brokenness. This isn't an apology, Emily said, her voice steadying slightly. I'm not asking for forgiveness or understanding or sympathy. I'm just... She stopped, seeming to search for words. I'm just telling you the truth. Finally, you were right about everything. Every accusation, every crime, everything you said, I did it. All of it. Deliberately and systematically, and with full knowledge of what I was doing. She looked around at the wedding guests, at Ethan standing rigid near the altar, at our broken parents, at the photographer who'd stopped taking pictures 20 minutes ago. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'll sign whatever legal documents your lawyer has. I'll pay back every cent I stole, even if it takes my entire life. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to. I'll sell everything I own. Not because I'm suddenly good, not because I've had some magical transformation. She met my eyes. But because you're right. I did this. All of it. And I can't run from it anymore. I'm done running. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of recognition. This wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was just Emily, for the first time in 25 years, telling the truth, without trying to manipulate the outcome. I looked at my sister for a long moment, seeing both the person who'd systematically destroyed my life and the wounded child who'd overheard herself being called weak and spent decades trying to prove otherwise. Both things were true. Both things could exist simultaneously. When I spoke, my voice was calm and clear. I accept your acknowledgement. I hear that you understand what you did and why you did it. I paused, making sure she heard what came next. But accountability isn't just words, Emily. It's consequences. It's facing everything you've done and accepting the full weight of it. My lawyer will be in touch Monday morning with payment plans, restitution terms, and documentation for the criminal investigations. You say you're done running good, because there's nowhere left to run to. 3 months after the wedding that never was, I sat in my apartment reviewing bank statements that still felt surreal. My parents had sold their investment property in Lake Oswego, the one they had planned to retire on, and the proceeds, $350,000, had been transferred to my account as partial restitution for the stolen inheritance. Margaret Chen had structured the repayment with clinical precision, parents responsible for the full $500,000 they'd helped Emily steal, with the remaining $150,000 to come from liquidating their stock portfolio and a second property they owned in Bend. My father had signed the documents without argument, his hand shaking so badly the notary had to verify twice that the signature was valid. My mother had cried silently through the entire process. I'd felt nothing watching them sign away their financial security. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a hollow recognition that consequences had finally arrived, decades too late. Emily was working 2 jobs, morning shifts, at a coffee shop, evening shifts, doing data entry for a legal firm. She was paying $1,000 per month toward her portion of the debt, which Margaret calculated would take a minimum of 12 years to fully repay, assuming she never missed a payment and maintained steady employment. The criminal investigation for identity theft was ongoing. The district attorney had indicated charges were likely, though Emily's cooperation and the restitution plan might result in probation rather than prison time. I'd seen her once in those 3 months, a chance encounter at the grocery store. She'd looked thin, exhausted, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing clothes I recognised from years ago. When our eyes met across the produce section, she'd nodded once acknowledgement, not greeting, and turned down a different aisle. I'd let her go. We had nothing to say to each other that hadn't already been said in front of 200 witnesses. Mark and I had been seeing each other carefully, rebuilding trust that had been shattered 8 years ago. We'd agreed to take things slowly, to not rush into trying to recapture what we'd lost. Some nights we had dinner and talked for hours. Other nights we sat in comfortable silence, just being present with each other. He told me once over coffee on his balcony that he'd spent 8 years thinking about what he should have done differently, and he wasn't going to waste this second chance by repeating old mistakes. The $100,000 I donated to Children's Hope Foundation, an organisation supporting foster children who'd been systematically overlooked in the system, the invisible kids who aged out without anyone noticing, had been the easiest financial decision I'd ever made. When the foundation director had called to thank me personally, I told her my grandmother gave me permission to matter. I'm passing that permission forward to kids who need to hear it even more than I did. The knock on my apartment door came on a Thursday evening unexpected. When I opened it, Ethan stood in the hallway looking uncertain, in a way I'd never seen during our brief college acquaintance. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes carrying a weight I recognised. "Kelly, I hope it's okay that I came by. I got your address from Mark. He said it would be all right to contact you." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "My mum wants to meet you, properly this time. Not at a wedding, not in the middle of chaos, just to talk." "How is she?" I asked, though I could read the answer in his face. "Not good. The cancer's progressed faster than the doctors expected. She's home now with hospice care. She doesn't have long left, weeks maybe." His voice cracked slightly. "But she keeps saying she needs to see you before..." He couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't hesitate. "When?" "Tomorrow, I can pick you up. Or if you prefer to drive yourself, I'll be there. Just text me the address and time." The relief in his expression was profound. "Thank you. She talks about you often. About that day at the wedding, about taking your hand. She says it was one of the most important things she's ever done." He started to leave, then turned back. "Kelly, I'm sorry for everything. For believing Emily's lies all those years ago, for not being brave enough to question what I was told. For..." "Ethan," I interrupted gently, "you were manipulated by someone who'd spent her entire life perfecting manipulation. You apologised at the wedding. We don't need to keep having this conversation. Your mum wants to see me and I want to see her. That's enough." The next afternoon, I drove to the address Ethan had sent, a modest house in a quiet neighbourhood with a wheelchair ramp recently added to the front steps. Ethan met me at the door, and I could see the strain of caretaking in the lines around his eyes, the exhaustion in his posture. "She's having a good day," he said quietly. "Alert, not too much pain. She's been waiting for you." He led me to a sun-filled bedroom, where Ethan's mother lay propped up on pillows, her body diminished by illness, but her eyes still sharp and warm. She smiled when she saw me, and I was struck by how much peace there was in that smile despite everything. "Kelly," she said, her voice thin but clear, "come sit with me." I took the chair beside her bed, and she reached for my hand with surprising strength. Her skin was papery thin, cool to the touch, but her grip was firm. "I need us to tell you something," she said, her eyes holding mine with intensity. "Something about your grandmother, something she made me promise to tell you when you were finally ready to hear it." Ethan's mother shifted slightly against her pillows, her breath coming shallow but steady. "Your grandmother and I became friends about 15 years ago, at a community garden where we both volunteered. We'd spend hours pulling weeds and talking about our families. That's how I learned about you long before I ever met you through Ethan. She squeezed my hand gently. Margaret talked about both her granddaughters, but she worried about you constantly. She saw what your parents were doing, the favouritism, the way they made you invisible while putting Emily on a pedestal. She documented it all in letters to me, dozens of letters over the years detailing every incident, every injustice. She needed someone outside the family to witness it, to validate that what she was seeing was real and harmful. My throat tightened. Even after death, my grandmother had been trying to protect me, creating a record with a trusted friend. Why didn't she intervene directly? Why didn't she confront my parents? She did multiple times. They'd promised to do better, and then nothing would change. Your father especially, she told him he was repeating his own father's mistakes, but he couldn't seem to break the pattern. Ethan's mother's eyes filled with sadness. So Margaret created the trust fund. But Kelly, it wasn't just about giving you money. It was a test. A test. She wanted to see if you'd fight for yourself when something concrete was at stake. Would you accept being erased, or would you finally stand up and demand what was yours? The old woman's smile was knowing and sad. She told me, I'm not leaving Kelly money so she can be comfortable. I'm leaving it so she'll have a reason to stop accepting being treated as if she doesn't matter. Sometimes people need concrete stakes to find their voice. The wisdom of it took my breath away. My grandmother had known that emotional abuse was too abstract, too easy to minimize and excuse. But theft of a specific amount of money, that was undeniable, actionable something even I couldn't rationalize away as just family dynamics. She made me promise to tell you this only after you'd fought back, after you'd chosen yourself over keeping the peace. Ethan's mother's grip tightened with surprising strength. You did it, sweetheart. You found your voice. You stopped disappearing. Margaret would be so proud. I stayed with her for another hour, talking about my grandmother, about the garden, where they'd become friends, about the woman I'd loved, but never fully known was fighting for me, even when I couldn't fight for myself. When I finally left, Ethan walked me to my car, thanking me quietly for coming, for giving his mother the peace of fulfilling her promise. That evening, Mark came over with takeout Thai food and a nervousness I hadn't seen in him before. We ate mostly in silence, and I could tell he was working up to saying something difficult. Finally, over cold pad Thai and warm beer, he spoke. There's something I haven't been completely honest about why I left 8 years ago. You know, Emily blackmailed me with my DUI record, threatened to send it to my employer. But there was more. He set down his beer, his hands unsteady. She also threatened to tell your parents, Kelly, said they were very conservative, very concerned about their daughters' reputations, and that they'd make sure you never spoke to me again if they knew you were dating someone with a criminal record. My parents wouldn't have... I started, then stopped. Yes, they would have. They absolutely would have used it as ammunition to end our relationship, to protect their image. I believed her because she was your sister, because she showed me texts where she'd supposedly told them about me, and they'd responded with horror. I now know those texts were fabricated, but at the time... Mark's voice cracked. I was terrified of losing my job, terrified of your parents turning you against me, terrified of being the scandal that destroyed your relationship with your family. I thought, if I just disappeared cleanly and quietly, you'd be hurt, but you'd recover, and you'd still have your family. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a cloud storage folder I hadn't known existed. I kept everything Kelly, every threatening message Emily sent, every call where she reminded me of the consequences if I came back. I recorded some of them. I'm in a one-party consent state, so it's legal. I saved screenshots of her fake texts from your parents. I documented everything because some part of me knew I'd need proof someday. He showed me message after message. Emily's threats escalating over weeks, her gleeful cruelty as she made sure Mark understood she held all the power. One voice recording caught my attention. Emily's voice younger, but unmistakable. "Stay away from Kelly or I ruin you. It's that simple. She'll get over you. She gets over everything eventually because she's trained to accept whatever she's given. But your whole life falls apart. Choose wisely." "I didn't leave because I didn't love you," Mark said, his voice breaking. "I left because I did. I thought disappearing would protect you from scandal, from having to choose between me and your family, from being collateral damage in Emily's vendetta. I was wrong. I should have told you the truth. Should have trusted you to make your own decisions. Should have fought instead of running." He looked at me with 8 years of regret in his eyes. "I came back because I finally had resources to fight her legally. I'd built my company, had money for lawyers, had the stability to weather whatever she threw at me. But mostly, I came back because I couldn't let another year pass with you thinking I abandoned you because you weren't worth fighting for. I loved you then, Kelly. I never stopped." I looked at this man who'd carried the weight of that decision for 8 years, who'd kept evidence like a promise to himself that someday he'd make it right, who'd loved me enough to leave even if leaving had been the wrong choice. "I need time to process this," I said softly. "Not because I'm angry, just because it's a lot. 8 years is a long time to mourn something that didn't actually die." "I understand," Mark said, starting to stand. "But Mark," I added, catching his hand, "I'd like you to stay while I do." Over the next 2 weeks, I visited Ethan's mother 4 more times. Each visit, she was a little more frail, a little more distant, but her mind remained sharp and her warmth toward me never wavered. Ethan would make tea and then disappear, giving us privacy, understanding somehow that his mother and I needed this time together. During what would turn out to be my last visit, she asked me to sit on the bed beside her rather than in the chair. Her breathing was laboured, each word clearly costing her effort, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like urgency. "I need to tell you something about Ethan," she said, her hand finding mine. "The day he brought Emily home to meet me, I knew immediately she was wrong for him. Too polished, too performed. I told him privately that you, the girl from graduate school, he talked about for months, you were the one with real substance, with quiet strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to." She paused to catch her breath, and I wanted to tell her to rest, but I could sense she needed to say this. "But I also taught my son to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to make everyone comfortable. I taught him that being nice was more important than being honest. I made him weak, Kelly. And when Emily manipulated him, he didn't have the tools to question her because I trained him to accept whatever he was told, as long as it avoided confrontation." Her grip tightened. "You taught him courage. At that wedding, when everything fell apart, you showed him what it looks like to choose truth over comfort. It came with pain, so much pain, but it was real. You saved him from a marriage that would have destroyed him, and you did it by simply refusing to be invisible anymore." She smiled, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "Thank you for that gift." She released my hand and gestured weakly toward her nightstand. "Open the drawer. There's something for you." Inside, I found a worn cookbook, the pages yellowed and food-stained with decades of use. The cover read, "Recipes from Home," in faded gold lettering. "This was my grandmother's," she said. "Recipes she brought from Ireland, recipes that made our house smell like love even when we had nothing else. I want you to have it." "I can't take this. It's a family heirloom." "You are family," she interrupted firmly. "Not by blood, but by choice. That's the better kind." She touched the book gently. "These recipes are for when you build your chosen family, Kelly. The people who see you without you having to fight for visibility. These are about creating nourishment, warmth home. You'll know when you're ready to use them." I held the cookbook carefully, feeling the weight of what she was giving me. Not just recipes, but permission to create the family I'd never had. to build something nurturing from scratch, rather than trying to fix something irreparably broken. As I was leaving, settling the cookbook carefully in my bag, she called my name one more time. Kelly, your grandmother told me something once. We were talking about you, about whether she should intervene more forcefully with your parents. She said, Kelly doesn't need saving. She needs someone to stop interrupting her rescue of herself. The old woman's smile was peaceful, complete. You did it, sweetheart. You saved yourself. We just got to witness it. 2 weeks later, Ethan called in the early morning. I knew before he spoke what he was going to say. His mother had passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, her suffering finally over. The funeral was held on a grey Thursday at a small church she'd attended for 40 years. I sat near the back with Mark beside me, not wanting to intrude on family grief but needing to be present. The service was beautiful, full of stories about a woman who touched countless lives with quiet kindness. I was preparing to leave when I saw her. Emily standing at the back of the church wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked thin and tired, years older than 3 months should account for. Our eyes met across the space and something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Then she started walking toward me, slow and deliberate, and every person in that church seemed to hold their breath. Emily stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. Up close, I could see the toll the past 3 months had taken, dark circles under her eyes. No makeup, wrinkled black dress that looked like she'd come straight from work. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Can we talk just 5 minutes? I'll understand if you say no. I know I have no right to ask anything from you. Mark's hand found mine a silent question. I squeezed once I'm okay and nodded to Emily. 5 minutes. We walked to a quiet corner of the fellowship hall. Emily pulled a thick envelope from her purse, worn at the edges, as if she'd been carrying it for weeks. This is a formal written apology. There's also an updated payment plan that my lawyer signed showing exactly how much I'm paying each month, how long it will take, and progress notes from my therapist. I've been going twice a week for 3 months. She held the envelope out, her hand shaking. I don't expect this to fix what I did. I just wanted you to see that I'm not running anymore, that I'm facing what I did instead of making excuses for it. I took the envelope, surprised by its weight. Emily stared at the floor, picking at her cuticles in a nervous gesture I recognized from our childhood. You don't have to read it now, she said quickly. I just needed you to have it, needed you to know I'm doing the work, even if it doesn't matter to you. I opened the envelope while she watched the floor. Inside were payment plans showing $1,000 monthly installments, therapist's notes documenting significant progress in recognizing manipulative patterns, and a handwritten letter on plain paper. The letter was different from anything Emily had ever said to me. No expensive stationery, just her careful handwriting. It started simply, I'm not going to ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not going to explain why because explanations aren't excuses. Then it listed specific harms. The sabotage of my relationship with Ethan, naming the lies, the fake evidence, the careful positioning, the blackmail that drove Mark away, including exact threats she'd made. The stolen inheritance detailed with painful precision, forged signatures, manipulated parents, money spent on lifestyle while I struggled. But what struck me most was her acknowledgement of systematic erosion. I saw you becoming smaller, year after year. I watched you learn to need less, be less. And I encouraged it. Every achievement I made it seem unimportant. Every connection I poisoned. Every time you took up space, I reminded you there wasn't room for both of us. She wrote about learning in therapy that her fear of being weak had made her keep me weak to feel strong. About recognizing our grandmother had been right, Emily had become someone who needed constant help, while I'd been forced to become strong enough to survive being treated as if I didn't matter. The final paragraph was stark. I can't give back what I took. I can't return Mark's 8 years or undo Ethan believing I was worth loving while you weren't. I can't return the inheritance Grandma protected for you. I can't give back the opportunities. I sabotaged the relationships. I destroyed the childhood where you should have been seen. All I can do is stop taking more. Stop lying. Stop manipulating. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, if I actually do the work instead of performing it, I can become someone whose apology means something, someone worthy of the sister I never deserved. I folded the letter carefully, my hands not quite steady. Emily was still staring at the floor, shoulders drawn up, hands twisted so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Emily, look at me." She raised her eyes slowly, and I saw genuine fear there. Not manipulation, just fear of being rejected. "I accept your apology." Her eyes widened, filling with tears she didn't try to hide or use. "I accept that you're acknowledging what you did," I continued. "I accept that you're trying to change. That matters. It doesn't fix what you broke, but it matters." I paused, wanting to be honest without being cruel. "But I don't forgive you yet. Forgiveness isn't something I can give on demand. What you did wasn't one mistake, it was systematic, sustained over decades. You destroyed relationships. You stole money meant to protect me. You made me doubt my own worth, my own right to exist without apologizing for it." Emily nodded, tears streaming, but didn't interrupt. "Forgiveness takes time. It might take years. It might never come fully. I see you're trying. I acknowledge the effort. But Emily, we need to be clear about what our relationship can be. We won't be close. Maybe never. The foundation of trust is shattered." "I understand," Emily whispered. "That's more than fair." "But we can be civil," I said. "We can be honest with each other. We can exist in the same family without warfare or performance. We can be two people who share DNA and complicated history, working on being decent to each other without any guarantee of closeness." I looked at her directly. "That's enough for now. Maybe that's all it will ever be. And that has to be acceptable because I'm not going to perform closeness. I don't feel just to make family gatherings comfortable." Emily nodded, wiping her face. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you for even speaking to me, for reading my letter, for acknowledging I'm trying." She took a shaky breath. "I'm not going to ask for more than you can give." We stood in awkward silence, empty air between two people who'd hurt each other, one deliberately, and one through the simple act of existing and refusing to disappear. Finally, Emily nodded once and walked back toward the reception. I watched her go, holding her apology and the complicated recognition that people could change without that change erasing what they'd done or creating an obligation for me to absolve them. I found Mark near the entrance. "Ready to go?" "Yes." I felt suddenly exhausted. He drove us back to my apartment in comfortable silence, his hand finding mine across the console. By the time we arrived, afternoon light was fading to evening grey. I was barely through my door, still holding Emily's envelope, when my phone rang. Margaret Chen's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a flutter of unease. My attorney didn't usually call on Friday evenings. "Miss Harrison, I apologise for calling during what I know is a difficult time. I saw the obituary for Ms. Mitchell, and I know you'd become close." She paused, papers rustling. "But there's been a development, a significant one regarding your grandmother's estate." I sank onto my couch, suddenly needing to sit. "What kind of development?" "Your grandmother left a second letter," Margaret said, her voice urgent. "One I was specifically instructed to give you only when you demonstrated you no longer felt invisible." "When was I supposed to receive this letter?" I asked, Mark moving closer to sit beside me on the couch, his presence steadying. "Your grandmother's instructions were very specific," Margaret said, and I could hear her unfolding papers. She wrote, "When Kelly takes legal action to reclaim what is rightfully hers, when she stops accepting erasure and demands to be seen, give her the second letter. Your lawsuit filing against Emily and your parents for fraud that became public record when we filed it with the court. That was my trigger, Kelly. the moment you chose to fight back instead of disappearing quietly, that's when I was authorized to give you this. My throat tightened. Even the conditions for receiving the letter had been a test, a measure of growth. Can you read it to me, or do I need to come to your office? I can read it to you now if you'd like, or I can bring it to you tomorrow. But, Kelly, there's more than just a letter. There are legal documents attached that you'll need to review and sign. What kind of documents? I'll read the letter first, then the documents will make sense. I heard papers rustling, then Margaret's voice shifted, taking on the cadence of reading someone else's words. My dearest Kelly, if you're hearing this letter, then you've done what I always knew you would do. You've stopped disappearing. You've stopped accepting the unacceptable. You've finally chosen yourself. I felt tears start before Margaret had even finished the first paragraph. Mark's arm came around my shoulders, anchoring me. Margaret continued, By the time you read this, you've likely discovered that the trust fund I left you was more than money. It was a test, a way to give you concrete stakes, something undeniable that would force you to recognize your own worth. I knew that emotional wounds could be explained away, minimized, rationalized, but theft of a specific dollar amount, that's real. That's actionable. That's something even you couldn't dismiss as just family dynamics. I needed you to fight Kelly, not because fighting is inherently good, but because you'd spent so long not fighting that you'd forgotten you had the right to. I needed you to value yourself enough to demand what was yours, to stop teaching people that your pain doesn't matter, and you did it. I'm so proud of you. Margaret paused and I heard her flip a page. Now comes the part where I ask you to do something that might seem impossible. Take your pain and transform it into purpose. I'm leaving you an additional $200,000, but it comes with a condition. Use it to start a foundation. I've already chosen the name if you'll accept it. The Visible Hearts Foundation. I gasped, Mark's grip tightening around me. I want you to help others who've been made invisible by their families, Margaret read. The overlooked younger siblings, the scapegoated children, the people who've been taught that their worth depends on how little space they take up. Give them legal resources to fight back when family members steal from them. Give them therapeutic support to heal from systematic emotional abuse. Give them a voice when they've been trained to stay silent. Give them permission to matter. Kelly, you've spent 33 years being made invisible. You know what that does to a person, how it shapes them, how it breaks them. Use that knowledge. Help others stop disappearing before they lose as many years as you did. Be for them what I tried to be for you, someone who sees them, who validates their pain, who gives them permission to take up space. The foundation documents are attached. I've set up the legal structure, chosen a board of directors pending your approval, and established the initial funding. All it needs is you. All it's ever needed is you. With all my love, your grandmother. I couldn't speak, couldn't process that my grandmother had planned this years ago, had anticipated not just my need to fight for myself, but my potential to help others do the same. Kelly, Margaret's voice was gentle. The documents establish the Visible Hearts Foundation as a registered nonprofit. Your grandmother funded it with $200,000, and you're named as the founder and executive director. If you accept, we can begin operations whenever you're ready. I accept, I whispered, then stronger. I accept. When can I start? 6 months later, I stood in the office space I'd leased in downtown Portland, watching Mark hang my grandmother's photograph on the wall beside the foundation's mission statement. The space was modest, but warm, comfortable chairs, soft lighting a reception area where Mark had volunteered to handle intake calls 2 days a week. My grandmother's recipe book sat on my desk, a reminder that creating nourishment could take many forms. Our first official client was scheduled to arrive in 10 minutes. Sarah Chen, 26 years old, had called last week with a story that felt like looking into a mirror. Older sister, who'd been the family's star parents, who'd dismissed Sarah's achievements while celebrating her sister's mediocrity, systematic erasure. that had left Sarah feeling like she existed only in the margins of her own life. When Sarah arrived, I could see the weight she carried in the way she held herself, trying to take up as little space as possible, apologising for being 10 minutes early, for taking up my time, for having problems that probably aren't even that bad. "Tell me your story," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "And don't apologise for taking up space. That's what this space is for." Sarah told me about a childhood spent invisible, about parents who'd made her sister's room beautiful, while Sarah slept in a converted storage closet, about college tuition paid fully for her sister, while Sarah worked 3 jobs, about a sister who'd recently taken out credit cards in Sarah's name, destroyed her credit, and when confronted claimed Sarah was being dramatic about borrowing between sisters. I listened without interrupting, seeing myself at 26, at 30, at 33, believing that the problem was me, that if I just needed less, complained less, existed less, maybe then I'd be worth loving. "Here's what I learned," I said when she finished leaning forward so she could see I meant every word. "Your silence isn't peace. It's permission for your own erasure. Every time you stay quiet when someone hurts you, you teach them that hurting you is acceptable. You teach them that your pain doesn't count as much as their comfort." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But they're my family. If I fight back, if I press charges for the identity theft like you did, they'll never forgive me. I'll lose them." Sarah, listen to me carefully. The people who truly love you won't ask you to make yourself smaller. They won't ask you to stay silent about being harmed. They won't ask you to disappear so someone else can shine. I pulled out the intake forms, the legal referral information, the therapist recommendations. Real love makes space. It doesn't demand that you shrink to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. But what if standing up for myself makes me the bad guy? What if everyone thinks I'm selfish or cruel? Or then let them think it, I said, and I watched her eyes widen in shock. "You're not here to be liked, Sarah. You're here to be whole. Standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's survival. And if your family can't handle you having boundaries, having worth, having the audacity to take up space, then that tells you everything you need to know about what they think your role should be." I handed her the forms. "I can't change your past. I can't give you back the childhood you should have had, where you were seen and celebrated and valued. But I can help you claim your future. I can help you get your credit fixed, your identity protected, your stolen money recovered. I can connect you with a therapist who specializes in family trauma. And I can tell you, from someone who spent 33 years being invisible, that fighting back is terrifying and painful and absolutely necessary." Sarah took the forms with shaking hands. "How did you do it? How did you find the courage?" "I stopped calling it courage," I said. "I started calling it survival. And once I reframed it that way, it became clear I could either keep disappearing to keep the peace, or I could choose myself. I chose myself. And you can too." After Sarah left, I stood by the window looking out at the city, at people moving through their lives with the casual confidence of those who'd never been taught to apologise for existing. Mark came up beside me, his hand finding mine. "You did good today," he said quietly. I looked around the foundation office, Mark's jacket hanging by the reception desk, my grandmother's photograph watching over everything, Sarah's intake forms on my desk waiting to be processed. The Visible Hearts Foundation logo on the wall, a design that showed a heart stepping out from behind a shadow into light. For 33 years, I'd stood behind pillars, literal and metaphorical. I'd made myself small and quiet and convenient. I'd taught people that my pain didn't matter, that I didn't matter. I'd disappeared so thoroughly that sometimes even I forgot I existed. Today, I stood exactly where I belonged in my own light, casting no shadow, taking up space without apology. The invisible daughter had become visible, and in doing so, in claiming my right to exist fully and loudly and imperfectly. I'd given others permission to be seen too. My grandmother had known this would happen, had planned for it, prepared for it, orchestrated it even after death. She'd given me money to fight for a test to pass, and then a purpose to pursue. She had transformed my pain into power, my erasure into visibility, my silence into a voice that could help others find theirs. I wasn't behind the pillar anymore. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that's where Kelly's story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. Not with a fairy tale ending where everything is perfect, but with something far more valuable, the hard-won knowledge that she matters, that her voice deserves to be heard, and that standing up for herself wasn't selfish, it was survival. Think about Kelly's journey. 33 years of being invisible. 33 years of being told in 1,000 small ways that her needs didn't matter as much as everyone else's comfort. 33 years of standing behind pillars, literal and metaphorical, because that's what good daughters were supposed to do. Stay small, stay quiet, don't make waves, just disappear a little more each day. How many of us have felt that way? How many of us have made ourselves smaller so someone else could shine brighter? How many of us have swallowed our pain, convinced ourselves that keeping the peace was more important than keeping our dignity? Kelly's grandmother understood something profound. Silence isn't peace. Silence is permission. Every time Kelly stayed quiet when she should have spoken up, every time she accepted unacceptable treatment, every time she made herself invisible to avoid conflict, she was teaching her family they could continue treating her that way. She was giving them permission to erase her. And the devastating part, she didn't even realize she was doing it. She thought she was being the bigger person. She thought that if she just needed less, complained less, existed less, maybe then they'd finally love her the way she deserved. But that's not how it works. People who need you to be small will never celebrate you being big. People who benefit from your silence will never reward you for speaking up. People who've built their identity on being more important than you will never voluntarily give up that position. Kelly had to take it back, had to fight for it, had to stand up in front of 200 people and refuse to hide anymore. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it caused chaos. Yes, it made people uncomfortable. But it also set her free. Her grandmother knew this would happen. That's why she structured the trust fund the way she did, not just to give Kelly money, but to give her a reason to fight, to give her concrete stakes that couldn't be rationalized away, to force her to finally value herself enough to demand what was rightfully hers. The money was never the point. The point was Kelly choosing herself for the first time in 33 years. And then, in the most beautiful twist her grandmother gave her, a way to transform that pain into purpose. The Visible Hearts Foundation isn't just about legal resources or therapy. It's about giving people permission to matter, permission to take up space, permission to stop apologizing for existing. Because here's the truth Kelly learned, and that maybe you need to hear. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be whole. And sometimes being whole means making people uncomfortable. It means setting boundaries others don't want you to have. It means demanding respect even when others have decided you're not worth respecting. It means stepping out from behind the pillar and saying, "I'm done disappearing." Will everyone support you? No. Kelly's parents struggled to accept accountability. Emily took months to begin genuine change. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. And that's okay. Kelly's not responsible for managing everyone else's feelings about her choosing to exist fully. The people who truly love you won't ask you to make yourself smaller. They won't ask you to stay silent about being harmed. They won't ask you to stand behind pillars so they look better. Real love makes space. Real love doesn't demand that you shrink. If Kelly's story resonated with you, if you've ever been the overlooked sibling, the scapegoated child, the person who learned to need nothing because needing anything was too dangerous, I want you to know. Your pain is real. Your erasure wasn't imaginary. You weren't being too sensitive. You were being systematically taught that you didn't matter and that teaching was wrong. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to take up space without apologizing for it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? Have you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? What pillars have you been standing behind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. If this story moved you, if it gave you permission to stop disappearing, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we share stories about people who refused to stay small, who chose themselves even when it was painful, who stood up and said, "I matter," even when everyone disagreed. These are stories of survival, of transformation, of people reclaiming their right to exist. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's the friend who always puts everyone else first. Maybe it's the family member who's been taught to accept unacceptable treatment. Maybe it's someone standing behind their own pillar right now, wondering if they'll ever be brave enough to step into the light. Send them this story. Let them know they're not alone. Kelly spent 33 years behind that pillar, but she's not there anymore. And neither do you have to be. Step into your own light. Take up your space. Stop apologizing for existing. The world doesn't need you to be smaller. It needs you to be whole. Because here's the truth that Kelly learned and that maybe you need to hear. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be whole. And sometimes being whole means making people uncomfortable. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs it. And remember, you were never meant to be invisible. You were always meant to be seen.